China is home to some of the most surreal and breathtaking landscapes on Earth, places that feel as though they belong to another world entirely. From towering snow-covered peaks and sacred Tibetan ridges to mist-shrouded forests and ancient alpine lakes, these unreal destinations reveal a side of China few ever witness. In this journey, we explore the country's most hidden and otherworldly mountain realms, each one steeped in natural wonder, cultural depth, and an atmosphere so dreamlike it defies belief. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Far across the deserts and steppes of western China, the towering presence of the Tianshan Mountains cuts a dramatic silhouette against the arid expanses of Xinjiang, a land where glacial majesty collides with scorching sands. Mount Tianshan, or the Heavenly Mountains as the name translates, represents one of China's most stunning and improbable natural wonders. A snow-crowned range rising abruptly from the Taklamakan Desert, where icy pinnacles and turquoise alpine lakes thrive in defiance of the parched terrain below. This paradox of fire and ice has carved out a region of ecological, cultural, and geological significance, where Kazakh nomads still roam grassy uplands beneath serrated ridgelines, and glacial meltwater feeds emerald lakes like Seiram and Tianqi. The Chinese section of the Tianshan Mountains stretches over 2,500 kilometers, its most iconic reaches forming a jagged crescent through northern Xinjiang. Tianqi Lake, or Heavenly Lake, is perhaps the most recognized jewel of this range. Nestled at over 1,900 meters above sea level beneath the looming shadow of Bogda Peak, Tianqi is fed by snowmelt and framed by fir forests and alpine meadows. The mirror-like water reflects the white caps of distant summits, creating a surreal scene that shifts from brilliant blue in summer to crystalline white come winter. Bogda Peak itself, a towering spire rising to over 5,400 meters, dominates the skyline and has long been revered by local Kazakh and Mongol peoples as a sacred mountain. These peaks are more than simply beautiful, they form the lifeblood of the surrounding arid basins. Glacier hidden within the folds of these heights act as slow-dripping reservoirs, feeding the rivers that support both human and animal life across Xinjiang. The region's relative inaccessibility has preserved not only its wild grandeur but also its biodiversity. Snow leopards, wild sheep, and golden eagles are still found here, elusive symbols of a largely untouched alpine wilderness. The slopes also shelter relic firs, junipers, and other cold-resistant flora in high elevation zones, while lower valleys support a mixture of desert-adapted shrubs and hardy steppe grasses. Culturally, the Tianshan Mountains are embedded deeply in the legends and identities of the people who live in their shadow. Nomadic Kazakh herders drive their sheep and horses across green summer pastures that carpet the foothills, erecting yurts in the traditional way and maintaining lifeways that have changed little over centuries. In other parts, ancient Silk Road cities like Turpan and Uremi lie just beyond the reach of the high snows, their markets still echoing with the mingling of Turkic, Han, and Central Asian influences. The mountains served not only as a natural barrier but also as a guiding corridor for the ancient traders who moved between east and west, their caravans winding along the lower passes and high trails in pursuit of silk, jade, and spices. The Tianshan region has also drawn spiritual and artistic inspiration for millennia. In Chinese cosmology, the name Heavenly Mountains suggests a divine origin, a celestial realm upon Earth, and Buddhist grottos carved into the cliffs at the mountain's periphery bear witness to centuries of religious devotion. Ancient monasteries and cave temples near the range, such as those in the Bezeklik caves, testify to a spiritual intensity rooted in the sheer isolation and sublimity of the land. The UNESCO designation of the Chinese Tianshan as a World Heritage Site in 2013 helped to further highlight the region's fragile yet globally significant ecosystems, as well as its deep cultural heritage. But the grandeur of Mount Tianshan comes with its own tensions. Climate change is affecting the region's glacier at an accelerating rate. Once reliable sources of meltwater are shrinking, threatening both pastoral and urban water supplies. Conservationists and scientists are racing to understand and protect this vulnerable ecosystem even as tourism slowly increases in areas like Tianqi and Seiram. The balance between preservation and access remains delicate, a dance between honoring a mountain's natural integrity and sharing its awe-inspiring presence with the wider world. And yet, there remains something eternal in the snows of the Tianshan, something untouchable by the hand of time. As the desert sun scorches the sands below, the peaks rise silent and immutable, their glacier whispering stories older than civilization. In their icy stillness lies a kind of reverence, a reminder that even in a land of dust and heat, heaven may still touch the earth. Eastward from the desolate chill of the Tianshan, the land undulates into the sweeping, sunlit openness of Qinghai, where the Bayanhar Mountains rise in solemn, majestic stillness. Here, the very pulse of China begins. This is the source region of the Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, birthed not in bustling valleys but in the icy silence of windswept plateaus and holy ridgelines. Mount Bayanhar, also called Bayanhar Shan, is not merely a physical elevation. It is a geographical and spiritual watershed, a place where rivers, legends, and identities are born. The name Bayanhar stems from Mongolic origins, roughly translating to rich or sacred mountain, and the meaning is apt in every dimension. Stretching along the eastern edge of the vast Qinghai Tibet plateau, the Bayanhar Range acts as a natural boundary between the arid hinterlands to the north and the deeply spiritual Tibetan heartland to the south. Its rolling peaks, some of which climb beyond 5,000 meters, are often capped with snow even in summer, their flanks draped in high-altitude grasslands that pulse green during the brief thaw before retreating into the browns and whites of an extended winter. But what defines Mount Bayanhar most critically is its role as the source of the Yellow River, Huanghe, the mother river of China. From a cluster of glacial springs near the twin lakes of Gairing and Ingering, the river begins its 5,464-kilometer journey, snaking across plateaus and through canyons before flowing eastward to irrigate some of the most fertile lands in Asia. The source region itself is known as the Yuguzhongli Basin, a seldom-touched wilderness of swampy wetlands, glacial tongues, and permafrost fields, lying at around 4,900 meters in elevation. In this birthplace of a great river, the air is thin and pure, the silence immense, only broken by the flutter of prayer flags or the occasional cry of a black-necked crane gliding across the sky. The Bayanhar region is deeply embedded within Tibetan culture and belief. The mountains are not just snow-covered rock but sacred sentinels watched over by protective deities in the Buddhist and Bon traditions. Local Tibetans regard the peaks as holy, and traditional sky burials, meditation caves, and ancient stone mani walls bearing prayers etched in Tibetan script can be found scattered across the landscape. These sacred markers blend seamlessly into the natural topography, creating a sense of a land where the divine and the earthly coexist. Nomadic herders, clad in heavy robes and guiding yak caravans, still traverse the vast open grasslands, living in yak hair tents and moving with the seasons as their ancestors have done for generations. Culturally, the area surrounding Bayanhar serves as a living museum of Tibetan pastoral life. The dialects spoken here, the ceremonial festivals, and even the architecture, sturdy whitewashed homes topped with bright-colored cloth streamers, reflect a harmony between people and an often unforgiving land. Towns like Madwa, which lies close to the Yellow River's source, offer a rare window into a world that moves at a rhythm largely untouched by modernity. Spiritual pilgrimages around sacred lakes and mountain Kora trails draw local devout walkers, circling the peaks as acts of reverence, repeating mantras with each footstep, creating an atmosphere where landscape and prayer fuse into one. Ecologically, Bayanhar represents a confluence of river systems, wildlife corridors, and climatic zones. The region's wetlands are vital breeding grounds for migratory birds, while its grasslands sustain wild yak, Tibetan gazelle, marmots, and wolves. In the higher elevations, elusive snow leopards still stalk the crags, symbols of a wildness that has endured despite climate shifts and human expansion. But this fragile equilibrium is under threat. The melting of glacier due to rising global temperatures, overgrazing in some pastures, and the encroachment of infrastructure into previously untouched areas have raised alarms among environmentalists and indigenous leaders alike. In recognition of its critical ecological role, the Bayanhar Mountains and the Yellow River Source Zone were designated part of Zhangjiajie National Nature Reserve, the source of three rivers, a vast protected area meant to conserve the birthplaces of the Yellow, Yangtze, and Mekong rivers. This is China's largest nature reserve and one of the most ambitious conservation efforts in Asia, aiming not only to protect endangered species but also to preserve the indigenous knowledge and lifeways of the Tibetan nomads who have long acted as de facto stewards of these lands. There is something profound in the way Mount Bayanhar anchors both the physical and spiritual geography of China. It is a place where the first drops of a mighty river trickle from glacial wombs into mythic life. It is where sky and land meet in equal majesty, and where centuries of quiet devotion echo in the wind across endless pastures. Travelers who find their way here do not come for comfort or spectacle. They come to stand where civilization itself began, to witness a stillness so complete that it seems to breathe, to move, to listen. As the sun sets behind the snowline, casting long shadows across the river's birthplace, the silence deepens, not with emptiness but with weight, the weight of legacy, of time, of memory inscribed not in stone but in snow and water. Bayan Ha is not merely seen, it is felt, it is honored, and in every whispered breeze and murmuring spring, it speaks. Tucked deep within the verdant folds of central Yunnan, Mount Elation rises not as a sharp, defiant peak but as a sprawling, sinuous range, veiled in mist and saturated with life. Unlike the stark, snowy majesty of the Tianshan or the sacred austerity of Bayan Ha, Elation exudes a quieter magic, one of dripping leaves, the hush of filtered sunlight, and the pulsing breath of the subtropics. This is a realm of cloud forests, where the air is thick with moisture and mystery, and where the concept of biodiversity hotspot takes on its most vivid, living form. Elation is part of a broader range that forms the backbone of central Yunnan, running roughly north-south through the prefectures of Sichuan and Qinghai. While not among China's tallest or most famous mountains, what it lacks in elevation it more than makes up for in ecological importance. Its highest peaks rise modestly above 3,100 meters, but its true majesty lies in its role as a climatic and biological boundary. It is here that the temperate ecosystems of central China yield to the subtropical richness of the south, and where the montane cloud forests reach their zenith in China. These forests, constantly enshrouded in mist and rain, are among the most threatened yet vital ecosystems on Earth. Elation is one of the few regions in China where true cloud forests still exist. Perpetually fed by drifting fog and monsoon rains, the forests here do not rely solely on precipitation. Instead, they drink from the clouds themselves. Mosses, lichens, ferns, and orchids coat every branch and trunk, and the forest floor teems with moisture-loving fungi. Towering evergreen oaks and laurels dominate the canopy, while bamboo thickets, rhododendrons, and wild tea bushes proliferate in the undergrowth. This humid, shaded environment has nurtured astonishing levels of biodiversity. Over 500 species of vertebrates are known to inhabit the Elation range, including rare and endangered creatures such as the Asiatic black bear, clouded leopard, and the Yunnan snub-nosed monkey, a hauntingly beautiful primate with pale, almost ghostly features and a preference for high, cold forests. The elusive red panda also makes its home here, slipping through the bamboo in near silence, feeding on shoots and berries under the cover of dense foliage. But it's not just fauna that thrive here. The plant life is equally extraordinary. Botanists regard Elation as a living museum of plant evolution. Dozens of endemic and relic species grow here, many of them survivors of prehistoric climatic shifts. Some trees found in Elation are considered living fossils, tracing their ancestry back tens of millions of years to the warm, wet eras of Earth's ancient past. Medicinal herbs and wild edible plants abound, many of which have been used for centuries by local communities steeped in traditional knowledge. The people of Elation, mostly of Yi and Hani ethnic heritage, have long lived in delicate harmony with their mountainous home. Their terraced fields of rice, maize, and tea climb the slopes like woven stairways, mirroring the contours of the hills in graceful arcs. Their villages, often reached only by winding footpaths, are built from wood and stone and nestle into the folds of the forest rather than replacing them. Traditional festivals, like the Hani's Kujaja celebration to honor the mountain spirits, reflect a worldview deeply rooted in ecological balance and ancestral respect. Local customs dictate that certain trees must never be cut, certain animals never hunted, and certain springs never disturbed. Practices that, though born of belief, now echo with scientific validity in our age of ecological crisis. Recognizing its ecological and cultural significance, the Chinese government declared the Elation National Nature Reserve in 1986, covering more than 500 square kilometers of core cloud forest ecosystem. This designation has helped protect vast tracts of the range from logging and agricultural encroachment, though threats still linger. The delicate balance of the cloud forest is extremely vulnerable to climate change. Even small shifts in temperature or humidity can destabilize this moisture-dependent ecosystem. Already, scientists have noted the slow retreat of fog-bound zones to higher elevations, compressing habitats and endangering species adapted to a narrow climatic band. Conservationists, scientists, and local leaders have begun working together in recent years to build a more sustainable future for Elation. Community-based ecotourism, reforestation programs, and the protection of sacred groves are being promoted to preserve both the biological richness, and the cultural heritage of the region. Unlike heavily commercialized tourism destinations, the draw of Alashan is its serenity and authenticity, a place not yet overwhelmed by crowds or commodified by spectacle. Visitors who journey here are often struck not by grandeur, but by intimacy, the sound of rainfall on broad leaves, the sight of a rare orchid flowering unseen on a cliffside, the deep, damp breath of the forest itself. At sunrise, the ridgelines of Alashan emerge from their night blanket of fog, the trees glistening with dew and the valleys still slumbering in the shade. The calls of birds and primates echo faintly through the trees, a reminder that this mountain breathes and sings in rhythms older than humanity. As the light filters through the mist, golden and ephemeral, one begins to understand what makes this place unreal, not for any magical fantasy, but for the sheer improbable resilience of life here. In a world losing forests by the minute, Alashan stands like a forgotten cathedral of nature, moss-covered, mist-enshrined, and profoundly sacred in its silence. From the emerald cloisters of Alashan's cloud forests, the land rises higher and colder until it becomes something entirely other, harsh, exalted, unforgiving, and eternal. In the remote and exalted highlands of Tibet, where the wind howls like a voice from the sky and the air grows razor-thin, stands the northern face of Mount Komalangma, the Tibetan name for what the world knows as Mount Everest. It is not merely the world's highest mountain, it is the axis of heaven and earth, a colossal presence that has commanded reverence and awe for millennia. From the Tibetan plateau, its icy northern wall rears up in stark defiance, shimmering beneath a sky so clear and blue it seems alien. In Tibetan culture, Mount Komalangma is not just a mountain, she is a goddess. The name itself translates to Goddess Mother of the World, and for local communities, both Tibetan Buddhists and ancient Bon practitioners, the mountain is a sacred being, alive with spiritual energy. Her snows are not merely frozen water, but the robes of a divine protector. Her clouds are veils of mystery. Her silence is the sound of eternity. The north face of Komalangma, accessible through Tibet's Qinghai County in Shigatse Prefecture, offers a perspective far removed from the more frequented southern face in Nepal. While the southern route has become synonymous with tourism and commercial expeditions, the Tibetan approach remains stark, surreal, and otherworldly, less crowded, more raw, more spiritual. From the base at Rongbuk Monastery, the view of the mountain is unobstructed and sublime, an endless slope of ice and stone ascending into an impossibly high white summit, framed by fluttering lines of prayer flags and the crumbling stones of ancient devotion. Rongbuk Monastery, perched at 4,980 meters above sea level, is the highest monastery in the world and serves as both a spiritual outpost and a historic gateway for early mountaineers. Founded in 1902 by a Nyingma Lama, it remains an active center of Tibetan Buddhism. Monks and nuns, their robes crimson against the barren earth, continue to chant and perform rituals in view of the mountain, believing that Komalangma is home to protective deities who must be respected and appeased. Before any expedition sets out from here, whether for science or summiting, offerings and prayers are made, not just for success, but for forgiveness for disturbing what is inherently sacred. Beyond the monastery lies the infamous Rongbuk Glacier, an icy river of time that twists and descends from the northern slopes of Komalangma. The landscape here is brutal and beautiful, fields of broken seracs, deep glacial crevasses, moraines of ancient stone, all bathed in ghostly hues of white and blue. It is a realm that feels beyond Earth. From this glacier, the path continues up toward Advanced Base Camp at around 6,400 meters, where few people ever reach and fewer still can stay long. The oxygen is thin, the cold is punishing, and the silence is absolute. The glacial valleys that radiate from Mount Komalangma's northern aspect are ancient, dynamic, and profoundly vulnerable. These glaciers are among the fastest melting in the Himalayas, victims of rising global temperatures. Once considered immutable, these ice flows are now receding each year, revealing not only bare rock but also decades-old expedition relics, tents, oxygen tanks, and even the remains of climbers. Yet even in their decline, the glacier retain their power, feeding the great rivers of Asia, including the Brahmaputra and Indus, which depend on Komalangma's icy breath to nourish the lowlands far below. The biodiversity of the northern Everest region is sparse but uniquely adapted. Wild yak herds still roam the windswept tundra, grazing on frozen lichen and coarse grasses. Tibetan antelope and snow leopard patrol these remote regions, their presence more suggested than seen. Migratory birds like bar-headed geese defy the limits of altitude, crossing passes higher than most human climbers can endure. The flora is equally resilient. Hardy cushion plants, alpine flowers, and wind-stunted shrubs cling to existence in one of the harshest environments on the planet. The people who live in the shadow of Mount Qinghai, mostly Tibetan herders and monks, possess a relationship with the land and mountain that is spiritual, practical, and philosophical. Their lives revolve around seasonal rhythms, livestock, and ritual. Despite modern roads reaching closer each year, these communities maintain ancient customs. Spinning prayer wheels, painting mantras on rock faces, building cairns as offerings to the gods of the mountains. They do not climb Qinghai. For many of them, to set foot on her summit is a transgression, not a triumph. Reverence takes the form of circumambulation, not conquest. The north face of Qinghai has seen fewer ascents than the south, largely due to its more difficult and technical conditions. The harsh winds, unpredictable weather, and sheer vertical cliffs present formidable challenges. Yet it was from the north that some of the earliest expeditions attempted to reach the summit. In the 1920s and 30s, British climbers like George Mallory and Andrew Irvine made their fateful attempts from Tibet, sparking both legend and mystery. Their exact fate remains unknown, though fragments of their story occasionally re-emerge: an old ice axe, a torn mitten, a camera yet unfound beneath the snow. Standing before the north face of Qinghai is not an experience of mere sightseeing. It is an encounter with the limits of human imagination and endurance. The air itself demands humility. Every breath feels borrowed. The mountain towers above not just in height, but in meaning, a symbol of what is unknowable, ungraspable, and sacred. As clouds begin to coil around the summit in the late afternoon, casting long blue shadows over the glacier below, the scene transforms from majestic to mystical. The flapping prayer flags whip into the wind like the voices of ancestors, and the stones seem to hum with ancient vibrations. You do not conquer Qinghai. You glimpse it. You endure it. You bow to it. And then you turn away, changed forever. Southwest of Qinghai's high glacial altars, the land begins to soften, warming with altitude and light until it blooms into the storied terrain of Yunnan. Here, the Tangshan Mountains rise in lyrical symmetry behind the fabled city of Dali, forming a grand green wall that curves along the western shore of Qinghai Lake. Unlike the brooding, snow-crowned giants of the Himalayas, Mount Dali Tangshan, part of the larger Tangshan range, has a gentler presence, elegant yet commanding, vibrant with wildflowers, cloaked in mist, and humming with history. It is a place where mountains meet memory, where alpine trails trace both natural beauty and the footprints of emperors, monks, and poets. Tangshan's peaks run roughly north to south for around 50 kilometers, their summits averaging over 3,500 meters, with the highest, Malong Peak, reaching up to 4,122 meters. The range serves as a natural barrier, sheltering the Dali Plain from the western winds and creating a rain shadow that nourishes the lush farmland below. But the true magic of Tangshan lies not only in its height or function, but in its relationship with Qinghai Lake. From every angle, the mountains reflect in the lake's vast, tranquil surface, creating a breathtaking contrast between water and sky, earth and air. The pairing of Tangshan and Qinghai has inspired centuries of art, philosophy, and spiritual longing. The range itself is famed for its high-altitude trails, many of which date back to ancient dynasties and were once traversed by scholars, pilgrims, and traders. Today, the famed Cloud Traveler's Path, Udai Lu, carved along the mountain's midsection, allows hikers and pilgrims to walk for over 10 kilometers while gazing across sweeping alpine meadows, dense forests, and panoramic views of the Dali Valley. The trail takes its name from the mists that often roll in from Qinghai Lake, draping the mountains in ghostly veils that drift between cedar and cypress trees, casting the world into a soft, dreamlike hush. Botanically, Tangshan is a marvel. Over 3,000 species of plants grow along its slopes, including a stunning variety of rhododendrons that bloom in brilliant reds and purples each spring, turning the upper ridges into a garden fit for immortals. Wild orchids hide in mossy alcoves. Medicinal herbs grow in secret under the canopy. Rare firs and pines cling to steep cliffs where snow lingers long after the valley has warmed. These forests are not only ecological treasures but reservoirs of traditional herbal knowledge long used by the Bai people, the region's primary ethnic group. The Bai, whose culture is deeply intertwined with the land, consider the Tangshan Range sacred. Many legends speak of immortal beings who once dwelled among its peaks or dragons that slumber within its caverns. Their customs include mountain worship ceremonies, seasonal offerings, and songs that echo through the valleys. Melodies that have been passed from one generation to the next in celebration of the Earth's fertility and spiritual depth. By architecture, with its signature whitewashed walls and flowing rooflines, reflects the mountains and sky, integrating harmoniously with the dramatic surroundings. Religious heritage is deeply embedded in Tsangshan's terrain. Dotted along the slopes are centuries-old temples, pavilions, and secluded monastic retreats. Among the most revered is the Qinghai Temple, built during the Tang dynasty and still standing at over 2,000 meters in elevation. The temple, modest in form yet rich in spirit, is often wrapped in morning fog, its silence broken only by the soft clang of a bell or the chant of a solitary monk. Higher still, hidden among granite spires and pines, are hermit caves and meditation platforms once used by Daoist and Buddhist sages seeking enlightenment through solitude and communion with nature. Yet Tsangshan's history is not only spiritual, it is also profoundly political and artistic. Dali was once the capital of the Nanzhao and later the Dali kingdoms, both of which flourished between the 8th and 13th centuries. These kingdoms regarded the mountain not just as a natural backdrop, but as a protector and patron of state. Palaces once overlooked Erhai's mirror, with Tsangshan rising like an emerald fortress behind them. Many of the stone inscriptions and cliffside carvings that still survive high on the slopes date from this era, commemorating royal pilgrimages, divine visions, and poetic reflections on the transience of life and the constancy of the mountain. Modern visitors to Tsangshan are often struck by the way the mountain range straddles time. Cable cars may now ascend some of the trails, and small tea shops cater to passing tourists, but the deeper one climbs, the more the modern world falls away. The rustling of wind in tall grass, the far-off sound of cowbells, the sudden appearance of a crimson azalea against grey rock, these experiences stitch the traveler into a timeless rhythm. High pastures unfurl into alpine meadows where yaks graze beneath soaring raptors. Crystal-clear mountain streams tumble down into waterfalls that vanish into mist, their courses shaped over millennia. And then there's the sky. The skies above Tsangshan are astonishing, vast, clear, and infinitely expressive. On cloudless days, the sky becomes a vault of sapphire above the jade ridges. During the rainy season, great banks of thunderclouds roll in from the west, drenching the valleys in rain before retreating back into silence. At sunset, the peaks turn gold, then pink, then indigo, reflecting in Erhai like brushstrokes from some divine artist's hand. At night, the stars crowd the heavens, unspoiled by city light, and the wind carries with it the faint scent of mountain herbs and wood smoke from distant villages. In every sense, Mount Dali Tsangshan is more than a mountain. It is a poem made of stone, water, and light. It is a bridge between heaven and earth, between history and present, between solitude and story. Travelers come here to walk the high trails and breathe the pure air, but they leave with something deeper, a quiet clarity, a memory of the way the world once was when sky, mountain, and soul moved as one. At the remote edge where Yunnan's rolling landscapes dissolve into the vertiginous wilderness of the eastern Himalayas, one mountain stands above all others, not in height alone, but in holiness, in legend, and in unapproachable majesty. This is Mount Kawakapo, or Meili Snow Mountain, as it is sometimes known, a staggeringly beautiful, razor-edged peak on the Yunnan-Tibet border that rises 6,740 meters into a sky so vast and pure it feels untouched by time. Cloaked in perennial snow, wreathed in myth, and fiercely protected from human conquest, Kawakapo is considered by many to be the most sacred mountain in all of Tibetan Buddhism, a mountain not to be summit, but to be revered. Its silhouette is unforgettable, a jagged pyramid of glacial white rising like a spear of light above the world, lording over a kingdom of deep river gorges, forested ridges, and knife-like spines. Often wrapped in swirling cloud and mist, the mountain reveals itself only briefly and partially, as if to remind all who look upon it that its true essence cannot be fully seen, let alone reached. The peak dominates the skyline above the tiny town of Dachin, and its base gives rise to the roaring Lansang River, Upper Mekong, which carves its way through the earth in churning, silt-colored torrents. To Tibetans, Kawakapo is not merely sacred, it is divine. Known locally as Kawa Gabo, it is considered an emanation of a wrathful deity and a protector of the Dharma. Every rock, stream, and forest on and around the mountain is infused with spiritual presence. Pilgrims travel great distances, often from across the Tibetan plateau, to perform the Kora, a ritual circumambulation of the entire range, a journey that spans more than 240 kilometers and takes 2 to 3 weeks on foot through punishing terrain, high passes, and deep valleys. The circuit is not undertaken lightly. Pilgrims often carry little but a bedroll and butter lamps. Walking in silence, prostrating themselves with every step, reciting mantras, and making offerings at key sacred sites. Climbing the peak itself, however, is considered a spiritual transgression. The mountain is inviolate, home to mountain gods who should not be disturbed. This cultural and spiritual boundary has, over the centuries, protected Qinghai from the same fate as other famous peaks like Everest or Annapurna. Despite modern mountaineering interest, no expedition has ever successfully summited Qinghai. The most infamous attempt occurred in 1991, when a joint Chinese-Japanese team of 17 climbers perished in an avalanche, a tragedy seen by many locals as divine retribution. Since then, not only have serious climbs ceased, but the mountain has become an icon of sacred preservation, where reverence replaces conquest. Geographically, the Meili Snow mountain range, of which Qinghai is the highest point, is extraordinary. Situated within the Three Parallel Rivers region, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, this area is among the most geologically active and ecologically diverse places on Earth. In the span of just a few kilometers, the terrain plunges from high alpine glacier to subtropical valleys below 2,000 meters. As a result, the range supports a vast spectrum of ecosystems, from coniferous and mixed forests rich with Himalayan oak, spruce, and rhododendron, to bamboo groves and high meadows that bloom with edelweiss and blue poppies. The area is home to rare and endangered species such as the Yunnan snub-nosed monkey, the snow leopard, and the red goral. The spiritual geography of the mountain is echoed in its physical form. The glacial tongues that spill from its flanks, such as the Mingyong Glacier, are considered sacred themselves, often visited by pilgrims who light incense and offer butter lamps at their melting edges. The Mingyong Glacier descends to within 2,700 meters, one of the lowest elevation glacier in China, and its retreat in recent decades due to climate change is viewed with alarm both environmentally and spiritually. Locals see the glacier's disappearance as a sign that human actions are disturbing the natural order. The region's cultural tapestry is equally rich. The people who live near Qinghai are predominantly Tibetan, but the influence of nearby Naxi, Lisu, and by communities adds layers of linguistic and ritual complexity. Traditional Tibetan homes, whitewashed, wood-beamed, and often festooned with colorful prayer flags, dot the ridgelines and riverbanks. Festivals like the Butter Lamp Festival or the New Year's Mountain Ceremony draw hundreds to the foot of the mountain to chant, burn juniper branches, and offer thanks to the gods. Monasteries like Phalai Sai, Flying Temple, perched on a cliff opposite the peak, offer some of the best views of Qinghai, and their resident monks perform daily rituals in its honor. Visiting the Meili Snow mountain region is as much a spiritual experience as it is a geographical one. Mornings often begin with fog obscuring the peaks, only to lift as the sun crests over the eastern ridges, bathing Qinghai in golden light. At dawn, the mountain appears incandescent, glowing with the ethereal beauty of fresh snow under clear skies. Local guides and pilgrims rise early to catch these fleeting moments, standing in reverent silence as the first light touches the summit. Hiking paths thread through forests and pastures at the lower elevations, offering quiet routes between villages and remote temples. Suspension bridges span mountain torrents, and wildflowers bloom along narrow, ancient trails worn smooth by generations of feet. Small stupas at the trailside, often piled with stones inscribed with prayers or etched with the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, the eternal invocation of compassion. The entire landscape is alive with spirit, memory, and continuity. Qinghai is not just a mountain to be admired from afar, nor an obstacle to be scaled, but a living, breathing deity in the form of ice and stone. To witness, it is to confront the sacred. To walk beneath, it is to step into a world where the divine and earthly remain entwined. Unlike more famous summits whose names are written in climbing logs and expedition records, Qinghai writes its name in silence, wind, and cloud. It endures not through conquest, but through reverence. In an age when most of the world has been mapped, climbed, photographed, and shared, Qinghai remains an untouched sanctum, a final monument to the idea that some places are meant not to be mastered, but to be worshipped. Far beyond the bustling river valleys and cloud-draped ridgelines of southern China, deep within the stark wilderness of Qinghai, lies one of Earth's most remote and hauntingly beautiful frontiers, the Qinghai region. At its cold, wind-swept heart rises Mount Qinghai, a solitary, snow-clad sentinel watching silently over a land of extremes. This is a place where altitude defines everything, where the sky looms vast and pitiless, and where life clings tenaciously to the edge of what is possible. Little known to the outside world, Mount Qinghai stands not just as a geographical feature, but as the spiritual and ecological centerpiece of Qinghai, a sanctuary of wildness that defies domestication. Known in Tibetan as Qinghai and often translated to mean Blue Ridge, the Qinghai region spans over 80,000 square kilometers of the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, making it one of the largest and highest natural reserves in the world. Mount Qinghai, rising to elevations over 5,200 meters, forms one of the region's principal high points. But unlike the dramatic, iconic peaks of the Himalayas, Qinghai is not characterized by dramatic crags or vertical cliffs. Instead, it is broad-shouldered, hulking, and ancient, more mesa than monolith, its slopes covered with snow for much of the year, and its profile softened by millennia of wind and ice. The environment surrounding Mount Qinghai is a high-altitude desert, known for its bitter cold, violent winds, and minimal precipitation. Here, winter lasts for more than half the year, and summer is brief, cool, and unpredictable. The landscape is vast and open, with rolling hills, salt flats, frozen lakes, and gravel-strewn plains stretching to the horizon. There are no trees, no towns, and almost no permanent human settlements. The air is thin, the silence immense, and the sheer scale of the landscape evokes a kind of existential awe. It is one of the most inhospitable yet ecologically significant places on Earth. What makes Mount Qinghai and Qinghai remarkable is not just their remoteness, but the incredible array of wildlife that migrates through these high plains and valleys. This is the primary migration corridor for the endangered Tibetan antelope, or chiru, whose journey across hundreds of kilometers of unbroken terrain to their birthing grounds in the Zhuanai Lake area has become one of the last great land migrations on the planet. Each year, thousands of female chiru travel in tightly coordinated groups across brutal terrain, crossing rivers and mountain passes to give birth in relative safety before making the arduous return journey. Mount Qinghai lies within the range of these migrations and offers vantage points from which herders, rangers, and researchers have long observed these movements. The mountain and its surrounding valleys are also home to other iconic plateau species such as Tibetan wild ass, kiang, Himalayan marmots, Tibetan foxes, and the ghostly snow leopard, which stalks the region in elusive silence. Golden eagles and black-necked cranes soar overhead, their cries echoing through the vast, thin air. The Qinghai region, including Mount Qinghai, was officially declared a National Nature Reserve in 1995, and in 2017, it was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These protections were hard-won. During the 1980s and early 1990s, rampant poaching of Tibetan antelope threatened the species with extinction, as their wool, known as chartouche, was highly valued in illegal markets. It was during this time that a group of volunteer rangers, led by environmentalist Sonam Dargi, took it upon themselves to protect the wildlife. Sonam paid the ultimate price, murdered by poachers in 1994, but his death galvanized national awareness, and conservation efforts gained momentum. Today, his sacrifice is honored throughout the region, and his story remains one of China's most powerful environmental narratives. Yet, even as the reserve protects against poaching and human encroachment, the harsh environment remains both a challenge and a blessing. Mount Qinghai is difficult to reach. There are no marked trails, no visitor centers, no luxury accommodations. Access requires careful planning, proper acclimatization, and a respect for the land's inherent danger. Those who venture into this realm do so not for leisure, but to study, to document, or to protect. This limited human presence is part of what has allowed the region's delicate ecosystems to survive largely intact, even as so many others across the planet have fallen to overuse and exploitation. Mount Qinghai's cultural significance is more subtle than its ecological role but no less profound. For Tibetan nomads and herders, it is one of many Yul Ha, territorial deities who guard specific regions of the land. Offerings are still made in its shadow, small piles of stones arranged into cairns, with prayer flags tied to sticks fluttering in the alpine wind. Travelers on the remote Qinghai Tibet highway, which cuts through parts of Qinghai, often stop to pay silent homage, aware that they are passing through a land where the gods walk closer to the earth. The beauty of Mount Keuka lies not in its accessibility or grandeur, but in its utter indifference to human ambition. It is a mountain that does not yield, does not perform. It simply exists, immense and quiet, at the intersection of heaven and desolation. In a world increasingly defined by noise, speed, and spectacle, Keuka offers a different vision, a stillness so profound that it borders on the sacred. To stand before it is to feel small, yes, but also timeless, connected to something far older and vaster than the self. As the sun sets across the high plains and long blue shadows stretch across frozen earth, Mount Keuka catches the last light, its snowfields blushing pink before fading into silver. The wind rises, carrying with it the sound of distant hooves and the memory of ancient migrations. The mountain, ever silent, bears witness. And in its silence, it teaches that not all sacred places are marked by temples or crowds. Some are simply left alone, vast, cold, and full of life. Stretching across the wind-scoured borderlands between Xinjiang and the northern fringes of the Tibetan plateau, the Altan Mountains, known in Chinese as HiddenPlaces, form a colossal, forbidding wall rising from some of the most extreme desert terrain on Earth. Among these brutal, fractured ranges stands Mount Arjun, a jagged crown atop a kingdom of solitude, where snow-draped peaks rise above salt flats and stony basins, and where life continues on the edge of the impossible. These mountains are not only remote, they are among the most uninhabited, inaccessible, and ecologically pure landscapes remaining on the planet. Mount Arjun, though lacking the fame of Everest or the elegance of Meili Snow Mountain, is no less impressive. It is the commanding peak within the greater HiddenPlaces range, and like many summits in this barren expanse, it stands not merely as a geological formation but as a monolith of endurance against time and desolation. Towering to elevations of more than 5,700 meters, it cuts a stark silhouette against the sky, its slopes fluted with ancient glacier, its ridgelines serrated like knives, and its base a bone-dry wilderness of shifting stones, hidden valleys, and frozen silence. The Altan Mountains form the northern edge of the vast Changtang Plateau and serve as a natural barrier between the arid lowlands of the Taklamakan Desert to the north and the frozen, thin-aired Tibetan expanses to the south. Mount Arjun stands almost exactly on this boundary line, a geological pivot where climates collide. Snow can fall here even in summer, yet the surrounding valleys remain desolate, baking under intense sun during the day and plunging into brutal cold at night. Rain is so scarce it is measured in millimeters per year, and yet glacier persist in the higher altitudes, feeding ephemeral streams that vanish into the desert floor long before reaching any river. Despite the extreme conditions, the HiddenPlaces range harbors one of China's most remarkable protected zones. The Arjun Mountains Nature Reserve, HiddenPlaces Ziran Bauhuk, a massive sanctuary established in 1983 and covering more than 45,000 square kilometers, an area larger than Denmark. This reserve was created not just to preserve the landscape, but to provide safe haven for a suite of rare and endangered species that have adapted to this merciless land over thousands of years. These include Tibetan antelope, chiru, wild yaks, Tibetan gazelles, snow leopards, Argli sheep, and black-necked cranes. Mount Arjun, with its steep, crumbling rock faces and remote glacial cirques, provides an essential habitat for some of the region's most elusive wildlife. Snow leopards are known to traverse these peaks, their spotted coats blending seamlessly with the grey and white stone. Argli, the world's largest species of wild sheep, cling to impossibly narrow ledges in small herds, while solitary wolves roam the dry basins below, their presence felt more often than seen. The region also supports an astonishing array of birds of prey, including lammergeiers, bearded vultures, which will silently in the thin mountain air, searching for the remains of fallen creatures. What sets Mount Arjun and its surroundings apart from many other wild places is not just their biological richness, but the sheer scale of their isolation. There are no villages, no roads, no regular human activity within the core of the reserve. For decades, even scientific expeditions have found it difficult to access the deeper valleys and hidden peaks. Satellite imagery often shows entire basins and ridgelines with no signs of modern development. No power lines, no lights, no structures, nothing but nature, uninterrupted. This total lack of human imprint has made Mount Arjun an essential laboratory for studying what Earth's ecosystems might have looked like in a truly untouched state. Culturally, the region surrounding Mount Arjun exists on the periphery of Tibetan and Uyghur influence, though very few people live close to the mountain itself. In ancient times, Hardy nomadic tribes may have skirted the edge of this range while herding animals or conducting trade along remote routes connecting Tibet, Xinjiang, and beyond. Traces of these journeys remain in rock carvings, obscure cairns, and weathered stone arrangements, markers of ancient rituals or paths long since abandoned. Yet to this day, the core of Arjin remains largely unexplored, holding onto its secrets with the indifference of a land that has never needed humanity. The stark grandeur of Mount Arjin is in many ways a metaphor for what Earth once was, and still could be. Its jagged skyline, draped in snow under a cloudless blue dome, evokes a sense of time untouched, a geological theater where the forces of wind, ice, and tectonics have shaped the land into raw, abstract forms. Unlike the romantic landscapes of the southern Chinese karsts or the verdant temple-studded ridges of Yunnan, Arjin is not soft or mystical. It is blunt, unapologetic, and confrontational in its beauty. It challenges you to witness it, not as a backdrop for human adventure, but as a sovereign world with its own rhythms and rules. Climbers have occasionally made expeditions into the range, but these are exceedingly rare. The mountain's remoteness, unpredictable weather, and lack of rescue infrastructure make it unsuitable for recreational mountaineering. In many ways, this has protected it from the damage caused by tourism elsewhere. There are no prayer flags fluttering on its slopes, no campsites littered with discarded gear, no pathways worn by 1,000 feet. Arjin remains pure, not by design, but by its sheer refusal to accommodate ease. In recent years, China's growing environmental awareness has brought increased attention to preserving the unique ecosystems of Western China, and the Arjin Mountains have benefited from tightened protections. Poaching has decreased, ranger patrols have expanded, and scientific monitoring, using remote sensors and camera traps, has begun to illuminate the hidden lives of the animals that roam this barren paradise. And yet, Mount Arjin continues to exist just beyond the fringe of most maps, in a zone of myth and silence. It is a monument not to civilization but to its absence. Here, the earth groans beneath ancient glacier, winds scream down empty canyons, shadows stretch endlessly across gravel plains, and the mountain, crowned in snow, rises over it all, solitary, untamed, and eternal. Mount Xiangshan, more poetically known as the Fragrant Hills, rises like a living canvas on the western edge of Beijing, where the concrete sprawl of one of the world's largest cities slowly gives way to emerald forests, vermilion leaves, and ancient stone steps disappearing into mist. Though modest in elevation compared to China's great alpine ranges, its main peak, Incense Burner Peak, Xianglu Feng, rises only to around 557 meters. Mount Xiangshan is steeped in centuries of imperial history, spiritual resonance, and seasonal spectacle that have earned it an enduring place in both Chinese cultural memory and the hearts of modern visitors. The name Xiangshan, meaning fragrant mountain, is not a romantic invention of recent times, but a term with roots as old as the mountain's earliest temples. According to tradition, the name originated from the temple incense that once wafted through the forested slopes, combining with the sweet aroma of native flora in spring and summer. Others believe the name comes from the mountain's resemblance to an incense burner, particularly when seen from a distance and framed by drifting fog. Either way, Mount Xiangshan has long been regarded as a place of purification, contemplation, and aesthetic inspiration. During the Tang and Song dynasties, the area began to attract recluses, scholars, and monks, who carved out simple retreats and small temples among its folds. But it was under the Jin dynasty, 1115 to 1234, and especially the Ming and Qing dynasties that the mountain truly rose in prominence. As Beijing grew into the political heart of China, Xiangshan became the imperial court's seasonal refuge, an oasis of cool forest and fresh air, especially prized in autumn when the maple and smoke trees turned brilliant crimson and gold. One of the most celebrated attractions on the mountain is the Fragrant Hills Park, originally established in 1186 during the Jin dynasty and later expanded under successive imperial administrations. By the time of the Qing dynasty, the park had become a luxurious and sprawling royal garden complex, known as Jingyi Garden, Garden of Tranquillise. The Qianlong Emperor was especially fond of the site, commissioning new temples, pavilions, and walkways that harmonized with the mountain's natural topography. Even today, fragments of these historic constructions, ornamental bridges, tiled courtyards, and secluded halls, can be found nestled under canopies of pine and maple. Of particular note is the bright temple, Jiao Miao, a Lamarist complex built in the Tibetan style during the 18th century to house visiting dignitaries from Tibet and Mongolia. Though damaged during the Second Opium War and again in the 20th century, the temple retains an aura of mystery, with stone lions standing guard over its fading colors and winds sighing through its open courtyards. Its structure, layered with intricately painted beams, golden finials, and circular archways, suggests not just religious devotion, but political symbolism, representing the Qing emperor's role as patrons of diverse peoples and cultures across their vast realm. Another notable site is the Biyun Temple, Azure Clouds Temple, located deeper into the forest. Built during the Yuan dynasty and later expanded during the Ming and Qing, Biyun is a marvel of religious architecture. Its steep stone stairways lead to halls containing exquisite carvings, bronze statues, and ancient pagodas. Perhaps most striking is the Hall of Arhats, home to 500 life-sized gold-painted wooden statues, each with a unique expression and posture. These figures, many centuries old, glow with an eerie vitality in the temple's filtered light. But for many, the true draw of Mount Xiangshan lies not in its architecture but in its autumn transformation. Each year, from mid-October to early November, the hills erupt in color as maples, oaks, smoke trees, and Chinese tallow trees ignite the forest with an astonishing palette of red, orange, and gold. The view from Incense Burner Peak becomes a riotous sweep of color, with winding stone paths cutting through dense woodland like veins in a flame. It is during this season that the fragrant hills live up most fully to their poetic name. The rustling of crisp leaves, the scent of dry pine needles warming under a late sun, and the occasional call of a distant magpie, all come together to create an atmosphere that is at once nostalgic and transcendent. This beauty has not gone unnoticed by China's literary and artistic figures. Generations of poets, painters, and philosophers have drawn inspiration from Xiangshan's changing seasons. Poems by Qing-era scholars often spoke of autumn walks through maple groves, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the sharp contrast of red foliage against the grey, stone temples. Landscape painters rendered the mountain in ink and wash, capturing its ethereal moods in every stroke, sometimes veiled in rain, sometimes dusted with snow, sometimes gleaming in the clear light of a Beijing winter. In modern times, Mount Xiangshan has become an accessible sanctuary for the millions who live in and around Beijing. The mountain and its park are now connected by road and even cable car, making the upper trails and panoramic vistas reachable to daytrippers and hikers alike. Despite this accessibility, it still offers secluded pockets of silence. Stone paths leading to tiny hermitages, forest clearings where one can hear only the whisper of wind in the branches, and benches overlooking the city far below, its towers softened by distance and time. Xiangshan's significance also stretches into more recent political history. In 1949, just before the founding of the People's Republic of China, Chairman Mao Zedong and the Communist Party leadership briefly based themselves in the fragrant hills. Mao stayed at Shuangqing Villa within the park, writing speeches and preparing for the establishment of a new government. Today, that villa has been preserved as a museum, linking the mountain not only to imperial grandeur and religious serenity but also to the pivotal moments of modern Chinese statecraft. What makes Mount Xiangshan unique among China's unreal places is this rare layering of natural splendor, cultural depth, and historical continuity, all within the boundaries of one of the world's most frenetic cities. Here, one can climb ancient steps once trodden by emperors, pass temples where lamas once chanted sutras, and stand in maple groves that have blazed with color for 1,000 autumns. It is a place of transitions, between seasons, dynasties, philosophies, and ages. And in that rustling quiet, beneath a fiery canopy of leaves and a wide Beijing sky, time seems to bend. Xiangshan does not just show what China was. It reminds you of what China remembers, and what it still longs to be. A land where beauty, reflection, and history meet in the shade of ancient trees. Mount Shilin, or Shilin Shueshan, rises with majestic calm on the western outskirts of Chengdu, the bustling capital of Sichuan province. Often shrouded in mist or capped in brilliant snow, it stands as a natural sentinel at the eastern edge of the Tibetan plateau. Though not as internationally famed as some of China's towering Himalayan giants, Mount Shilin is no less surreal. A place where ancient forests meet frozen ridgelines, where pandas prowl through bamboo groves, and where tradition and modernity coexist in the form of both remote ecological reserves and sleek ski resorts. The name Shilin Snow Mountain conjures poetic imagery and has historical resonance. It was immortalized by the Tang dynasty poet Du Fu, whose brief exile in Chengdu resulted in some of China's most beloved verses. He once wrote of the shilling snows that float through 1,000 li, referencing how the mountain's snow-capped summit was visible from his cottage in the city far below. This line alone has linked the mountain with romanticized solitude and snowy beauty in the Chinese literary imagination for over a millennium. Mount Shilling is actually a part of the Qinghai mountain range, which extends in a north-south arc through western Sichuan. While not particularly high by Himalayan standards, its main peak, Daxwatang, reaches just under 5,364 meters. It remains one of the most significant ecological and recreational zones in southwest China. Its steep vertical relief, spanning from subtropical valleys to alpine tundra, creates a remarkable range of habitats in a relatively compact area. This elevational diversity, combined with geographic isolation and long periods of glacial stability, has made it one of the core components of the Sichuan Giant Panda Sanctuary, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Indeed, Mount Shilling is more than just a snowy playground for tourists. It is a living ark of biological heritage. The mountain's mid-elevation forests are dense with bamboo understories, which form the primary food source for wild pandas. These elusive creatures, once nearly extinct in the wild, are known to inhabit the deeper, protected sections of the mountain, where trails are faint and silence prevails. Alongside them live other rare and endemic species such as the red panda, the golden snub-nosed monkey, the Sichuan tarkeen, and numerous pheasants, including the multicolored Temminck's tragopan and the golden pheasant with its fiery crown. The vegetation belts that stripe the mountain are as dramatic and surreal as any painted scroll. The lower slopes are thick with humid, subtropical broadleaf forest, transitioning into coniferous woodland as one ascends, dominated by fir, spruce, and ancient hemlocks draped in moss. Above this grows the rhododendron belt, whose blossoms in spring coat the hills in a dreamscape of pinks, whites, and purples. And higher still lies the alpine zone, where wind-blasted grasslands and lichen-crusted rock give way to permanent snow and ice. It is this progression of life zones, from rainforest to snowfield, that gives Mount Shilling a layered, almost fantastical beauty. Unlike many other natural preserves in China that remain strictly protected or inaccessible, Shilling Snow Mountain is also a popular recreational destination, particularly during winter months. The Shilling Ski Resort, located at the lower slopes around 2,200 to 2,800 meters, is one of the most developed ski facilities in southwest China. It features multiple trails for skiing and snowboarding, including beginner and intermediate slopes serviced by gondolas and chairlifts. What makes this resort unusual and nearly surreal is its location. Few places on Earth allow one to glide down snowy trails while, in the far distance, bamboo forests and subtropical ridges shimmer under a winter sun. But even outside ski season, Mount Shilling remains an active hub for ecotourism, hiking, mountaineering, and sightseeing. The mountain's extensive network of trails leads to waterfalls, ravines, high-elevation lakes, and panoramic ridges. One particularly memorable viewpoint is the Sun and Moon Terrace, a natural platform from which hikers can observe a vast sea of clouds rolling like surf across the lower valleys. On especially clear mornings, the silhouettes of nearby high peaks, sometimes including Mount Gongar, can be glimpsed against the horizon like ghostly giants. Another surreal experience is the flower bloom season, typically between late April and early June. During this time, the mountain is awash with color. Wild rhododendrons and azaleas explode into bloom, creating entire hillsides of pink and crimson. This contrasts with the higher snowbanks still clinging to the upper ridges, resulting in a dreamlike contrast of fire and frost. The combination of birdsong, the scent of fresh blossoms, and the occasional fluttering of prayer flags, left behind by local Tibetan pilgrims, creates a deeply meditative atmosphere. Local Tibetan and Qiong communities also maintain a cultural presence in the surrounding valleys, adding human layers to the mountain's natural mystique. Throughout the area, visitors may encounter shrines nestled in cliff hollows, small stupas festooned with colorful flags, or villages where the architectural style echoes centuries of spiritual and alpine life. Festivals, traditional dances, and regional crafts, including intricate weaving and silverwork, still thrive here, serving as a living complement to the ecological story unfolding in the forests above. In recent years, efforts have been made to balance tourism with conservation, a tricky endeavor in any ecologically sensitive zone. Fortunately, much of Mount Shilling's upper areas remain protected under state forestry and environmental agencies. Tourist traffic is largely restricted to designated zones, while more pristine habitats are monitored by biologists and rangers. Research stations in the region collect data on wildlife populations, plant biodiversity, and the effects of climate change, an ever-present concern for glacial zones and alpine environments. Glaciers on Mount Schilling have retreated slightly in recent decades, and hydrological changes have become more apparent, especially in the context of broader environmental shifts across the Tibetan Plateau. Yet despite these challenges, Mount Schilling continues to shine as one of China's most accessible yet dreamlike highland experiences. It is a place where surreal beauty does not come from mythic remoteness or towering altitudes alone, but from contrasts. Here, you can stand in a cedar grove thick with mist, hear the call of a red panda echo across a valley, and in the same breath, watch skiers carving patterns into nearby snowfields. You can see a rare orchid blooming in shade as a hawk circles above jagged white peaks. And you can feel that unique mixture of awe and serenity that only such layered, living landscapes can evoke. Whether one visits for snow sports, mountain solitude, or a brush with endangered wildlife, Mount Schilling remains one of China's most unreal places. A highland where history, ecology, recreation, and reverence intertwine in the breath of mountain air and the hush of falling snow. Mount Taibai, or Tibetan, rises as the solemn and commanding summit of the Qinghai Mountains in central China's Shaanxi province. At 3,767 meters, 12,359 feet, it is the highest peak in the entire Qinghai range, standing as a geographical and cultural threshold between northern and southern China. Unlike many other peaks in the country that awe with extreme altitudes or volcanic ferocity, Taibai's surreal power lies in its ancient presence, a vast and enigmatic realm of swirling mist, mirror-like alpine lakes, ghostly conifers, and legends that echo from every rock. For thousands of years, Mount Taibai has played a vital role in Chinese cosmology and ecology. Geographically, the Qinghai Range serves as the natural dividing line between the temperate north and the subtropical south. The mountains themselves form a biogeographical boundary, a kind of living seam across the nation's central spine. Mount Taibai, as the highest node on this ridge, becomes the grand orchestrator of climatic and ecological transitions. From base to summit, the mountain spans a dramatic array of ecosystems, from deciduous forests and bamboo groves to conifer belts, alpine meadows, and permafrost tundra. This vertical sweep gives the mountain one of the richest biodiversity profiles in inland China. Much of Taibai's lower elevations are blanketed in lush forests that alternate between maple, oak, and rhododendron depending on the altitude and season. These forests are not only vibrant in color, especially during the crimson blaze of autumn, but also teem with life. The mountain is home to over 1,800 species of plants and 1,000 species of animals, some of them rare or endangered. The elusive golden snub-nosed monkey, endemic to China's high-altitude forests, is one such resident. So too is the Asiatic black bear, the golden pheasant, and the brilliantly patterned Chinese giant salamander, one of the world's largest and oldest amphibians. As one ascends Taibai's winding paths, often carved into stone or traced along ancient ridgelines, the air thins and cools, and the forest gives way to stretches of cold-loving firs, pines, and finally subalpine scrub. Beyond 3,000 meters, one steps into what feels like another world, an ancient glacial zone scattered with massive granite boulders, high-elevation peat bogs, and an eerie quiet broken only by the wind or the call of a highland hawk. The crown jewel of this upper world is a series of glacial lakes, many of which lie cradled in hidden valleys or between ridge lines. The most famous among them is Tianqi, Heavenly Lake, a crystal-clear alpine tarn reflecting the jagged skyline above and steeped in spiritual reverence. These lakes, often frozen for much of the year, are cloaked in mist and legend. Local folklore tells of spirits dwelling within them, of immortals who once bathed in their waters, and of hermits who achieved enlightenment on their shores. The presence of Daoist temples and shrines, some dating back over 1,000 years, adds to the spiritual aura. The most famous temple complex is the Taibai Temple, nestled high up in the mountain, once a hub for monks and hermits seeking cosmic harmony amid nature's grandeur. The mountain's very name, Taibai, refers to Venus in Chinese astronomy, reinforcing its celestial associations. In fact, Taibai's spiritual legacy is interwoven deeply with both Taoism and imperial Chinese history. The Qinghai Mountains were seen as the axis of balance in Chinese geomancy, the feng shui dragon vein of the empire. Emperors of the Tang and Song dynasties patronized Taoist monasteries on Tibai's slopes, seeking both divine favor and eternal wisdom. It is said that ancient alchemists once climbed the peak in search of herbs and elixirs that would grant immortality. Whether one believes these stories or not, the very shape and setting of the mountain, with its serrated summits, deep ravines, and sudden openings onto high plateaus, feels like a landscape drawn from the dreams of sages. Hiking on Mount Tibai today is both physically demanding and emotionally transporting. The Tibai Mountain National Forest Park, established in 1991, manages the most popular and accessible parts of the mountain. The park includes stone-paved paths, wooden walkways suspended over cliffs, cable cars for steep ascents, and rest stations with scenic viewpoints. Yet despite this infrastructure, many sections of the mountain retain their wild essence. Certain upper routes, particularly those reaching the main peak, are long, steep, and only passable during summer and early autumn due to snow and ice. One of the most surreal experiences is traversing the Shenlong Ridge, Divine Dragon Ridge, a narrow and jagged stretch that offers sweeping views over the Shaanxi Plains to the north and the mist-drenched valleys to the south. On clear days, one can see both the Wei River Basin, cradle of Chinese civilization, and distant glimpses of the Daba Mountains, the green, misty mountains of southern China. It is this panoramic view, this literal straddling of north and south, that captures the essence of Mount Tibai as a meeting place between two realms. Seasonal changes add further surreal layers to Tibai's character. In spring, wildflowers bloom in the thousands across its meadows, especially rhododendrons and alpine lilies. In summer, the forest floor is alive with frogs, fireflies, and the murmur of water from mountain streams. Autumn brings a kaleidoscope of foliage, painting the slopes with gold and crimson. But in winter, the mountain becomes otherworldly. Ice sheathes the waterfalls, snow hushes every sound, and wind patterns carve delicate frost into the rocks. Even from afar, Mount Tibai in winter appears like a place suspended outside time. Perhaps what makes Mount Tibai most surreal is its atmosphere. Not just the fog or snow or winds, but the way the landscape feels imbued with memory. There's an ancientness here, not simply in its rocks but in the echoes of pilgrim chants, the weathered temple stones, the forgotten poems carved into cliffs, and the feeling that every hidden trail might lead to a revelation. For all its biological wealth and geological might, it is this quality, the mystical quietude of a sacred summit, that continues to draw both scientists and seekers, wanderers and worshippers. Mount Tibai is not just a high point in the landscape, it is a high point in the experience of China's unreal places. It offers solitude without silence, wilderness without abandonment, and spirituality without pretense. Standing atop its windswept peak, surrounded by sky and stone, one does not simply look outward but inward, into the very spirit of the land and the self. Mount Harbor, or Harbor Shueshan, stands proudly on the northwestern edge of Yunnan province, gazing across the roaring depths of the Jinsha River at one of Earth's most famous canyons, Tiger Leaping Gorge. This proximity alone would grant it a surreal aura, but Mount Harbor offers far more than a scenic counterpoint. Towering at 5,396 meters, 17,703 feet. This snow-capped peak is a world of ancient glacier, unspoiled alpine ecosystems, and dramatic contrasts, where the vertical rise from the gorge to the summit spans more than 3 vertical kilometers in a single, breathtaking sweep. To look up at Mount Harbor from the gorge floor is to feel the earth flex in monumental form. Its name, Harbor, is said to derive from the Nashi language, meaning golden flower. In local legend, Harbor Snow Mountain is the brother of the sacred Meili Snow Mountain, Kawakapo, to the northwest, and the two form part of a spiritual geography that connects mountains to myth, kinship, and cosmology. But unlike Kawakapo, which is so sacred that climbing it is forbidden, Mount Harbor offers a different kind of majesty, one that is climbable, hikeable, and deeply immersive. The mountain is particularly famous for its distinct snow line, a shimmering threshold visible from miles away. Above this altitude, permanent snowfields and glacial remnants cloak the upper ridges and cirques. Below it, alpine meadows, rhododendron thickets, and moss-covered conifer forests descend rapidly toward subtropical valleys. This sharp vertical gradient makes Harbor an ecological treasure chest, containing a dense concentration of microclimates and biodiversity in a relatively compact region. Perhaps one of the most fascinating features of Mount Harbor is its glacial cirques, amphitheater-like hollows carved into the rock by the grinding action of ancient glacier. These cirques are home to stunning alpine lakes that reflect the surrounding cliffs in mirror-like stillness. The most famous is the Black Sea Lake, Qinghai, nestled at around 4,200 meters above sea level. Despite the name, its waters are often a shade of turquoise or deep green, depending on the sky and snowmelt. The lake is surrounded by windswept grasslands and boulders left behind by the glacier retreat. In the silence of this high-altitude basin, one feels the timelessness of geology and the fragility of snow. Climbers and trekkers are particularly drawn to Mount Harbor because it represents one of the most accessible non-technical high-altitude ascents in China. Though high and demanding, it does not require ropes or specialized mountaineering gear in fair weather conditions, making it a popular first 5,000-meter peak for aspiring high-altitude adventurers. The ascent from the base camp, usually set near the 4,000-meter mark, offers a surreal transition through increasingly harsh and beautiful terrain. From flowered meadows to rocky moraines to ice-patched slopes, each step toward the summit unveils a new visual chapter. On clear days, the summit grants spectacular views of the entire Hengduan mountain range, as well as the snow peaks of Meili to the west and the endless valleys cascading into Sichuan to the north. Yet for all its mountaineering appeal, Harbor is not merely a playground for adventurers. It is also a stronghold of Naxi and Tibetan cultures, whose traditional villages, prayer flags, and wooden lodges dot the valleys and ridgelines. One of the most well-known towns near the mountain is Baishuatai, a site of stunning natural limestone terraces said to resemble frozen rice paddies, formed over millennia by calcium-rich spring water. These white steps cascade down the slopes and glisten in the sun, giving the place an ethereal quality. Cultural traditions are tightly intertwined with the landscape. Many of the Naxi people still practice forms of Dongba religion, an ancient shamanistic belief system that considers mountains as living spirits. Mount Harbor, with its snow crown and skyscraping profile, is revered as a sacred guardian. During festivals or seasonal rites, locals climb partway up the mountain to present offerings, burn incense, or tie prayer flags to trees and shrines. This reverence does not prohibit climbing, as with some sacred mountains, but it does impose a quiet respect, an understanding that you are entering a realm both natural and numinous. Perhaps nowhere is the surreal nature of Mount Harbor better felt than in the cloud inversion moments, when dense river fog creeps up the Jinsha Gorge in the early morning and then spills over the lower ridges. From higher slopes, it appears as if a sea of clouds is pouring upward like a waterfall in reverse. This phenomenon, paired with the vivid reds and oranges of dawn on the snowfields, creates an illusion of the Earth floating in an alternate, airborne dimension. Everything becomes both impossibly vast and intimately still. The flora and fauna of Mount Harbor only add to its mystical allure. The lower forests are home to barking deer, muntjacs, and even the elusive clouded leopard, while higher elevations are frequented by snow partridges, Himalayan griffon vultures, and herds of blue sheep. Botanists and naturalists are often stunned by the concentration of medicinal plants, many used in both traditional Chinese and Tibetan healing. Orchids, peonies, and gentians grow wild in places untouched by roads or settlements, and entire ecosystems thrive in side valleys that remain inaccessible to vehicles or development. Tourism here remains comparatively light, particularly beyond the base camp area. Those who venture off the usual trail, exploring lesser-known ridges or venturing toward the remote Yulong and Harbor glacial basins, are rewarded with solitude and scenes of untrammeled wilderness. These are places where time feels paused, where snow remains on ledges far into the dry season, and where no artificial noise competes with the hum of wind, the crunch of boots on frost, or the distant rumble of falling ice. In recent years, local efforts have emerged to promote sustainable trekking and ecotourism, with a focus on preserving the fragile high mountain ecosystems and respecting indigenous traditions. Community-based guest houses, guide cooperatives, and conservation programs have taken root, helping to ensure that the mystique of Mount Harbor is not lost to mass tourism or careless exploitation. Still, the balance remains delicate. The mountain's alpine meadows are increasingly impacted by climate change, and the glacier itself has retreated significantly in the past few decades. But for now, Mount Harbor remains a sanctuary, a snow-wrapped throne above a gorge of myth, where clouds brush the rocks like silk, and the earth seems to dream out loud. Its ridges hold not just the weight of snow and time, but of stories, those whispered by the wind, carved by the glacier, and kept alive by the people who live in its shadow. Mount Erlang's North Ridge, nestled deep within the mist-laden highlands of western Sichuan, is one of those elusive places in China where maps reveal only contours, but reality offers landscapes so ethereal they seem born of clouds. This less-traveled spine of the Erlang Mountains, a range tucked between the Sichuan Basin and the Tibetan Plateau, remains largely unknown to tourists, often overshadowed by more accessible destinations nearby. Yet its very obscurity is its greatest strength. Here lies a world of steep, forest-shrouded cliffs, narrow gorges where fog pools like water, and high-altitude ridges where the sky meets an untouched green wilderness. Part of the Hengduan mountain system, the Erlang Range sits at a geographic and ecological crossroads, and the North Ridge represents a hidden corridor into this transitory zone between subtropical river valleys and the lofty terrains of eastern Tibet. The Erlang Tunnel, a famous feat of engineering that cuts through the range, hints at the mountain's significance as a passage, but it's the northern offshoots, far from this man-made artery, that house the surreal beauty and ecological richness that few ever witness. Climbing into the North Ridge is like passing through veils. The lower slopes are blanketed in thick temperate rainforest, deciduous hardwoods, dense bamboo thickets, and towering firs, and the air is heavy with moisture. Mornings often begin in silver fog, with only bird calls and the occasional rustling of hidden animals to break the silence. These forests are ancient, shaped by glacial eras and monsoon seasons, and they hold a rare ecological prize, the habitat of the giant panda. This area forms part of the broader Sichuan Giant Panda Sanctuary, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the last strongholds for wild pandas. Though sightings are vanishingly rare, pandas are shy, solitary, and mostly nocturnal. Their presence is etched into the landscape. Scratches on bamboo trunks, footprints near streams, and occasionally the remnants of half-eaten stalks. Researchers from time to time conduct quiet monitoring missions here, often spending days tracking the elusive creatures through terrain so steep it must be navigated on all fours. Beyond the panda, the North Ridge ecosystem supports a remarkable biodiversity. Red pandas prowl the tree canopy, golden snub-nosed monkeys swing between mossy limbs, and tarkeens, those bizarre goat-antelope hybrids, lumber along high ledges. The bird life is astonishing. Snow pigeons, tragopans, partridges, and even lammergeiers soar above the cliffs. Beneath the trees, medicinal herbs and rare orchids bloom in the shadows, nourished by constant mist and the nutrient-rich soil of a living mountain. As one ascends, the forest begins to thin and give way to high meadows and stony ridgelines, often rimmed with frost even in late spring. These are the cloud pastures, wind-whipped plateaus where yaks and dzos, hardy Tibetan crossbreeds, graze under the care of nomadic herders who move between the lower valleys and these uplands as the seasons change. Their simple wooden shelters, prayer flags flapping from poles, and smoky fires are the only signs of human life in long stretches of terrain. Though this part of the Erlang Range is rarely explored, it has long existed in local Tibetan and Qiong folklore. It is said that hidden among the folds of these northern peaks are sky ladders, natural stairways of stone used by the immortals to descend from the heavens. Streams that cascade down from the heights are often believed to be sacred tears, frozen remnants of old celestial battles or stories of unfulfilled love between mountain spirits. Local shamans, particularly among the Qiong people, have long considered certain ridges and rock faces to be infused with energy, places for offerings, chants, and seasonal rituals. Geologically, the North Ridge is a testament to the violent birth of the Himalayas and the ongoing tectonic compression that shapes western China. The rock here, mostly slate, schist, and gneiss, is fractured and folded into sharp arêtes and pinnacles, giving the range a rugged, sawtooth appearance. Landslides, rockfalls, and avalanches are common, especially in the rainy season when the already precarious slopes are soaked through. Despite these dangers, the landscape is profoundly seductive. Certain hidden glacial cirques and alpine tarns, some with no names and barely recorded on satellite imagery, glow turquoise or emerald beneath a shifting sky. These lakes, nestled in cradles of rock, reflect the haunting solitude of their surroundings. The silence here is absolute, broken only by the whistle of wind or the haunting calls of birds. In these places, one feels utterly removed from the flow of modern life, as though the ridge exists in another age or plane of reality. Few trails mark this ridge. Most who enter rely on guides from nearby Tibetan or Yi villages, who know the faint game paths, the hidden springs, the subtle signs of weather shifts. These guides speak in soft voices when walking through certain forest patches, out of reverence for the spirits believed to dwell there. They recount old tales of travelers who wandered off and never returned, sometimes swallowed by fog, sometimes taken by the mountain's will. To venture into the Erlang North Ridge is not to take a casual hike. It is to enter a realm of myth and mist, where the land resists easy navigation and the air feels ancient. Here, sunrise does not break so much as seep in, slow, golden, filtered through trees bearded with moss. Here, a clearing in the forest becomes a cathedral, and a sudden glimpse of a snow-draped peak can bring tears to the eyes, not just for its beauty, but for the raw enormity of the wild. It is a place that resists photography and digital description. You cannot bottle the silence or upload the texture of the moss, the chill of a mountain spring, or the weight of mist clinging to your hair. And so the North Ridge remains a secret, not because it is hidden, but because its essence cannot be captured, only experienced. It demands humility. It rewards patience. It reveals itself only to those willing to get lost in its folds. And it is perhaps in that very act of getting lost, of leaving behind roads, phones, expectations, that one truly understands why this mountain, cloaked in its timeless, drifting shroud, is among the most unreal and unspoiled places in all of China. High in the heart of Hubei province lies a realm suspended between myth and ecology. Mount Shennongjia, a sprawling, mist-draped mountain system with an identity that is as much spiritual as it is biological. Rising from the northern edge of the Daba Mountains, this vast wilderness is unlike any other in central China. Recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and designated as both a national park and nature reserve, Shennongjia is not only a cradle of biodiversity but also a vessel of Chinese legend, holding within its valleys tales of gods, monsters, and sacred healing. The name Shennongjia translates roughly to Shennong's ladder or Shennong's harness, a tribute to the mythical Emperor Shennong, the divine farmer and herbalist of Chinese antiquity. According to tradition, it was in these rugged, fog-enshrouded highlands that Shennong, credited with inventing agriculture and discovering medicinal herbs, roamed in search of curative plants. It's said that after testing hundreds of roots and leaves, some of them fatally poisonous, Shennong died on these very slopes, consumed by a final experiment. The mountain thus became sacred ground, a natural pharmacy where thousands of species still grow in dense forest shadows and alpine meadows. Mount Shennongjia is not a single peak but rather a broad massif of rugged ridges, river valleys, limestone caves, and high plateaus, covering more than 3,000 square kilometers. The highest summit, Shennong Peak, Shennongding, reaches over 3,100 meters, making it one of the tallest non-Himalayan peaks in eastern China. But altitude alone does not define the landscape. The mountain is a palimpsest of ecosystems, ranging from broadleaf forests and bamboo groves at lower elevations to coniferous cloud forests and subalpine meadows higher up. Fog rolls in almost daily, sweeping across peaks in silent waves and transforming entire forests into dreamscapes. These forests are teeming with life. Shennongjia is famous for being one of China's most biodiverse inland areas, sometimes referred to as the Noah's Ark of the Orient. Over 3,700 species of vascular plants thrive here, along with more than 600 species of vertebrates. The reserve is home to endangered mammals such as the golden snub-nosed monkey, the clouded leopard, the Asian black bear, and even the elusive Chinese giant salamander, the world's largest amphibian. Birdwatchers can find everything from crested ibis and golden pheasants to raptors like the mountain hawk eagle gliding through the air currents. Perhaps most famously, Shennongjia is the only known place in the world where a white-furred population of golden snub-nosed monkeys resides. These ethereal, ghost-like creatures are not albino but naturally pale due to genetic variation, and their rarity has only deepened the aura of mystery that surrounds this place. Scientists from around the globe make pilgrimages to this biological frontier, conducting studies that continue to reveal new species and genetic lineages that date back to prehistoric epochs. But Shennongjia isn't just a scientific treasure trove, it is a land wrapped in folklore and spectral allure. One of the most persistent legends is that of the Yunnan, or wild man, China's version of Bigfoot. For centuries, local people and occasional travelers have reported sightings of large, ape-like humanoid figures in the remote forests. Descriptions vary. Some say the creatures are over 2 meters tall, covered in reddish or gray hair, with footprints nearly twice the size of a human's. Expeditions, both governmental and amateur, have combed the mountains for decades in search of the Yunnan, turning up tantalizing fragments, strange hair samples, footprints, even makeshift shelters. Yet definitive proof remains elusive, and so the legend endures, woven into the mountain's mythos like the vines that cling to its cliffs. The human history of Shennongjia is equally layered. Tujia and Han communities have lived on the margins of the region for centuries, carving terraced farms into slopes, cultivating medicinal herbs, and performing rituals to appease mountain spirits. Ancient stone paths wind through forests, leading to crumbling temples and shrines built in honor of Shennong and other deities. Even today, traditional herbalists from the region climb into the misty forests to collect ginseng, angelica, rhubarb, and dozens of other healing plants, many of which grow nowhere else on Earth in such abundance. Traveling through Shennongjia is not like visiting a single scenic site, it is entering a living myth. The area is sparsely populated, and much of the terrain remains inaccessible by road. Visitors may begin in the Muyu Township, a quiet village that serves as a gateway to the reserve, where eco-lodges and scientific stations welcome travelers and researchers alike. From there, narrow roads climb into the forested interior, past waterfalls that plummet down fern-laced cliffs, and across wooden bridges over mountain streams that glisten like liquid glass. In summer, the mountains bloom with wildflowers, azaleas, rhododendrons, and Himalayan blue poppies, while butterflies flutter through the trees in kaleidoscopic waves. In autumn, the forests ignite in fiery red and gold, rivaling even the famous maples of the northeast. Winter brings snow to the high peaks, transforming the landscape into a quiet cathedral of frost and silence, broken only by the distant howls of wolves or the crack of an ice-laden branch. Ecologically, Shennongjia also plays a crucial role in the water systems of central China. It forms the headwaters of several important rivers that feed into the Yangtze, and its vast forests act as natural carbon sinks, stabilizing the climate and preserving rainfall patterns. This role, combined with its species richness and cultural value, earned Shennongjia its designation as a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve in 2016. Yet despite its prestige and protection, Shennongjia remains one of the least developed major reserves in China. This is by design. Government policy has intentionally restricted urban encroachment and mass tourism, seeking to preserve the delicate balance between human access and ecological integrity. Strict quotas control the number of visitors to certain core areas. Drone usage is banned in sensitive zones. Even hiking requires permits and adherence to marked paths, in order to avoid damaging the undergrowth or disturbing wildlife. It is perhaps this careful stewardship, this reverence for both the seen and unseen, that has allowed Mount Shennongjia to retain its sense of otherworldliness. This is not a mountain to be conquered or commercialized. It is a sanctuary, a breathing library of life, and a temple to a mythic past that still breathes in the rustle of leaves and the veiled faces of the forest. To stand at dawn on one of its fog-wreathed ridgelines, with the scent of pine and damp earth in the air, is to feel time blur. You are no longer just a visitor, you are part of the story, a brief character in a tale older than empires, deeper than rivers, and grander than the canopy overhead. Tucked along the western banks of the Xiong River, directly facing the urban sprawl of Changsha, lies a mountain that embodies a delicate union of scholarship, spirituality, and seasonal beauty, Mount Yuelu, or Yuelishan, one of China's most culturally resonant and quietly majestic peaks. While modest in elevation, rising only about 300 meters above sea level, its impact on Chinese history and consciousness is anything but small. This verdant slope is not a wilderness in the remote sense, like the Shennongjia Peaks or Bayanha Ranges. Rather, it is a living scroll of civilization, where Confucian thought, Buddhist serenity, and natural wonder have harmonized for over 1,000 years. Mount Yuelu is most renowned for being the backdrop of the Yuelu Academy, one of China's 4 great ancient academies of learning, founded in 976 AD during the Northern Song dynasty. This institution was far more than a center of study. It was a crucible of Chinese intellectual tradition, shaping the currents of Confucian philosophy that would course through the veins of dynasties for centuries. Generations of scholars, among them Zhu Xi, the great Neo-Confucian thinker, taught, debated, and wrote treatises under the shade of the mountain's pine and maple trees. The academy later evolved into Hune University, which still stands today at the mountain's base, continuing the legacy of education in a modern form while preserving its ancient roots. Walking through Yuelu Academy is like stepping into a time capsule where architecture, ideology, and the land itself coalesce. The stone gates, tiled roofs, and wooden beams of the academy's halls reflect Song, Ming, and Qing dynasty styles, weathered but intact. Statues of revered philosophers guard courtyards where once, disciples gathered to study the 4 books and 5 classics. The Hall of Confucius, the Steely Pavilions, and the library all whisper fragments of conversations long past, where virtue, filial piety, and governance were once dissected with ink and brush. But Mount Yuelu is not merely academic, it is spiritually charged, a place where Daoist, Confucian, and Buddhist ideals intersect along the winding trails and moss-covered paths. Temples, shrines, and pagodas dot the landscape, forming a silent dialogue across religions and centuries. Among the most famous is the Lushan Temple, a Buddhist sanctuary originally constructed during the Tang dynasty. Nestled among tall cedars and flowering azaleas, the temple offers a tranquil retreat where crimson robes of monks drift like lanterns beneath gabled eaves. Farther up the slope is the Yunlu Palace, a Daoist sanctuary that offers not only spiritual elevation but also literal panoramic views of Changsha and the meandering Xiong River. Here, the air seems charged with quiet energy, the kind that lends itself to meditation, calligraphy, and contemplation of the Tao. Nearby, statues of Laozi and the 8 Immortals are carved into stone walls and hidden grottos, often obscured by ivy and thyme. What also defines Yuelishan is its role as a seasonal refuge, especially during the autumn months, when the forest transforms into a brilliant tapestry of scarlet, gold, and amber. The maple trees, some of them over 100 years old, ignite the landscape, and locals refer to this annual transformation as the Red Yuelu phenomenon. Photographers, poets, and walkers alike flock to the mountain during this fiery season, when the light filtering through the red leaves bathes the stone paths in hues of nostalgia and fleeting beauty. Yet the mountain remains equally compelling in other seasons. Spring brings cherry blossoms and magnolias that blush across the lower slopes, while summer cloaks the mountain in deep emerald, the leaves rustling in warm breezes and cicada song. Winter, meanwhile, adds a sense of stoic elegance. Though snow is rare in Changsha, a light dusting on temple roofs or frost on the stone railings along the ridge makes Yuelishan feel like a Sumi-e painting brought to life. The trails of Mount Yuelu cater to both casual visitors and committed hikers. Well-maintained stone steps ascend from the base near Yunnan University, branching into shaded paths that snake toward lookout points and secluded groves. One of the most popular destinations is the Awan Pavilion, whose name translates to Love of Evening Pavilion. Built during the Qing dynasty, this delicate structure is perched above a forested ravine and is immortalized in a poem by Chairman Mao Zedong, who studied nearby as a young man. The pavilion is a symbol of the mountain's power to inspire revolutionary thought, poetic introspection, and peaceful repose, all at once. Indeed, Mao's connection to Mount Yuelu is more than incidental. He often hiked here with classmates, and the mountain provided a setting for many of his formative ideological conversations. It was here, perhaps more than anywhere, that his vision of a transformed China took root. This adds another layer of meaning to the mountain, one that links it not only to ancient tradition but also to the radical reimagining of a nation. Yet, despite its proximity to the city, Mount Yuelu manages to retain an air of timelessness. The sounds of Changsha's traffic fade quickly as one ascends. Birdsong replaces car horns. The scent of incense from temple burners overtakes the smells of the street. Couples walk hand in hand. Elderly residents do Tai Chi beneath ginkgo trees. Artists sit for hours with sketchbooks on their knees. It is a public park, a sacred mountain, a historical site, and a botanical haven all rolled into one, and that is precisely what makes it so remarkable. In many ways, Yuelishan is a microcosm of Chinese cultural geography, where mountains are not just geological features but moral landscapes, where nature and human intellect are never truly separate. Its slopes have borne witness to dynastic changes, philosophical shifts, wars, and revolutions, yet still offer the same gentle welcome to those who climb them with curiosity or reverence. Whether you come seeking the wisdom of Confucius, the serenity of Buddha, the spontaneity of Laozi, or just a glimpse of red maples against a blue sky, Mount Yuelu meets you halfway. It does not challenge like Everest, nor does it astound with alien peaks like karst towers, but it endures quietly, anchored in centuries of thought and soft beauty. And in that quiet, it becomes unforgettable. Rising from the heart of northern Shaanxi province, Mount Guanshan, stands as a quiet sentinel of time, a mountain steeped in history, religious legacy, ancient architecture, and natural tranquility. Unlike the craggy sacred mountains of the east or the immense alpine giants of the west, UnseenChina unfolds with a subtler majesty. Rolling pine-covered ridges, dramatic rock outcroppings, and forgotten temples clinging to cliffsides, whispering stories of emperors, monks, and hermits who once passed through its slopes. While it lacks the tourist renown of places like Mount Wutai, Guansan is a place where nature and antiquity coexist in a remarkably intimate embrace. Located near Ningwu County, part of the Luliang Mountains range, Mount Guansan rises to a respectable elevation of around 2,624 meters, making it one of the highest peaks in Shaanxi. Its prominence, both geographical and cultural, dates back to imperial times. Though now remote and often overlooked, this mountain has long been a refuge for Taoist practitioners, reclusive monks, and poets seeking solace away from the entanglements of the world. The name Guansan itself, loosely translated as overlooking springs or observing the essence, reflects its spiritual gravitas, suggesting a place where one might commune with the elements or search for inner clarity. The mountain is blanketed in dense pine forests, with canopies that filter light into shifting mosaics of green and gold. These forests are among the most ecologically pristine zones in northern China, playing host to a surprising array of flora and fauna. Particularly in spring and summer, wild peonies, herbs, and orchids bloom alongside old-growth conifers, creating a palette of textures and scents that evoke a timeless alpine wilderness. In autumn, the mountain is set ablaze with color as maple and birch trees erupt into flames of crimson and ochre, making it one of Shaanxi's best-kept seasonal secrets. But what truly distinguishes Mount Guansan is its atmosphere of sacred seclusion, made tangible by the presence of ancient temples, some of which are remarkably well preserved despite their isolation. The most notable among them is the Yunnan Temple, also known as the Cloud Rock Temple, a Taoist sanctuary built directly into the face of a vertical cliff. This temple complex dates back to the Northern Wei dynasty, 386 to 534 AD, and has survived over a millennium of weather, war, and neglect. To reach it, pilgrims and travelers ascend a series of narrow, hand-carved staircases that wind through forests and over crags. Upon arrival, the view opens dramatically, wooden pavilions suspended against sheer stone, supported by stilts and beams that seem to defy gravity. Statues of Taoist deities, incense burners, and stone inscriptions fill the inner sanctums, while wind whistles through the wooden rafters, as if the mountain itself were breathing. The temple is still active, though mostly tended by a small cadre of aging monks, whose chants echo through the halls at sunrise and dusk. Not far from Yunnan Temple lies another relic of time, the Qinghai Temple, or Cool Breeze Temple, perched at a higher elevation where clouds often gather. Its name reflects both its temperate microclimate, a blessing during Shaanxi's hot summers, and the serene state of mind it inspires in visitors. This temple's courtyard, enclosed by gnarled cypress trees and stone balustrades, overlooks a sweeping valley where mist rolls in each morning like a slow-moving tide. Aside from temples, Mount Guansan is famous for its weathered stone formations, which take on surreal shapes due to centuries of erosion. Visitors can wander among massive granite outcroppings, crested ridgelines, and hidden grottos, many of which are named for their resemblance to animals, immortals, or mythical creatures. Local legend holds that the mountain was once the training ground for immortals, and that the oddly shaped stones were once clouds solidified by celestial energy. Whether one believes the stories or not, the rocks themselves invite contemplation. They appear frozen mid-movement, like ancient beings petrified by time. Adding to the mountain's mystique is the Guansan National Forest Park, which now protects much of the area as a conservation and ecological tourism site. Within its bounds are crystal-clear mountain springs, glacial cirques, and peat bogs, where rare highland mosses and cold-water species survive. Trails lead to hidden waterfalls, cave temples, and stone bridges covered in lichen, each corner of the park infused with a quiet sacredness. Birdsong is constant, especially in the mornings, and the air is cool, resinous, and untainted. For centuries, Mount Guansan has been a destination for hermits and scholars, those who sought wisdom not in the cities, but in solitude and contemplation. Ancient steles and carvings inscribed into cliff faces quote lines from Laozi and Zhuangzi, reflecting the mountain's deep connection to Taoist philosophy, which emphasizes harmony with nature, stillness of the heart, and freedom from societal bindings. Some caves once housed reclusive monks, who lived in silence for decades, their only companions the deer, pine trees, and mountain breezes. While it remains less developed than China's more commercial sacred mountains, this lack of development has been a blessing in disguise. Mount Guanzhen today retains a raw authenticity, untouched by the kitsch of souvenir shops or swarms of domestic tourists. Travelers who make the effort to explore its slopes are rewarded with quietude, clean air, and a sense of stepping into another era, where time moves more slowly and the human footprint is modest. At night, the mountaintop skies are famously clear. With minimal light pollution, the heavens open in breathtaking clarity, stars wheeling across the darkness, the Milky Way visible with the naked eye. Campers and visitors often sit in silence beneath the cosmos, the only sounds being the rustling pines and the distant cry of a night bird. It's an experience that transforms the place from a historical landmark into something more primordial, reminding visitors that beyond dynasties, doctrines, and human ambition, the mountain simply exists, as it always has. In short, Mount Guanzhen is not merely a destination, it is an atmosphere, a philosophy, a living memory. From its ancient temples built into cliff walls to its misty pine ridges and whispering forests, it invites not just hiking, but reflection. It is a place where you can walk in the footsteps of sages, trace your fingers across centuries-old stone, breathe in air that once filled the lungs of monks and emperors, and perhaps come away feeling, if only slightly, a little closer to the rhythm of the natural world. Shrouded in rolling mists and bristling with spiritual intensity, Mount Jigushan, located in Abar Prefecture of northwestern Sichuan, emerges from the highlands like a forgotten cathedral of stone and cloud. Remote, ethereal, and vastly underappreciated in the broader scope of Chinese natural wonders, this mountain carries a solemn grandeur. Its knife-edged ridges, fog-drenched slopes, and deep-cut alpine chasms capturing the primal beauty of the eastern edge of the Tibetan plateau. Here, elevation is not merely a measure of height, but a threshold between earth and sky, culture and wilderness, past and present. Jigushan is not one singular peak but part of a greater mountain system that twists and folds dramatically through the Minute Mountains, a transitional zone between the Sichuan Basin and the Tibetan highlands. Rising to elevations over 4,500 meters, the massif holds sway over a stark and formidable landscape. Craggy summits pierce the heavens, while beneath them lie narrow valleys carved by ancient glacier and braided rivers that glint like silver threads from afar. The defining visual feature of Jigushan is its serrated ridgelines, jagged, blade-like formations that alternate between black volcanic stone and snow-blasted granite. These ridges loom like ancient battlements over the valleys below and are often cloaked in fog or veiled by drifting clouds, lending the mountain an ever-changing, phantasmal appearance. The air is crisp, often scented with pine resin and ozone, and the wind carries with it the sharp bite of altitude. When storms roll in from the west, the entire range can disappear into a grey, swirling vortex, only to re-emerge minutes later in sudden, searing sunlight. What sets Jigushan apart from many of Sichuan's other peaks is its cultural fusion, a rich interweaving of Tibetan spiritual traditions, indigenous Qiong heritage, and Han Chinese influences. The surrounding regions are inhabited predominantly by Tibetan communities, many of whom still lead semi-nomadic lives centered around yak herding, alpine agriculture, and monastic devotion. Dotting the valleys and foothills are colorful Tibetan prayer flags, stone cairns, and whitewashed stupas, symbols of faith fluttering in the mountain winds. These cultural markers aren't tourist props, they are authentic living expressions of belief, passed down through generations that have revered the mountain as a spiritual beacon. Indeed, Jigushan is considered sacred in local belief systems. It is not uncommon to hear locals refer to it as a dwelling place of mountain spirits or an abode of protective deities. Pilgrims from nearby villages often undertake arduous treks to its upper ridges, performing kora, ritual circumambulations, while chanting mantras and spinning prayer wheels. The act of walking around the mountain is believed to purify sins and bring merit. These pilgrimages are made with the same solemnity as those to more well-known holy peaks like Mount Kailash, even if Jigushan receives no global acclaim. Nature in this region remains relatively undisturbed. The upper slopes of Jigushan are home to rare alpine vegetation, including high-altitude rhododendrons, dwarf juniper, and seasonal wildflowers that emerge in bursts of color each spring. In the lower forests, towering spruce and fir trees form dense, moss-draped corridors where visibility narrows to mere feet in the mist. These woods are alive with biodiversity. Tibetan macaques, musk deer, blood pheasants, and even elusive predators like snow leopards and Asiatic black bears roam the terrain. It is not a place where humans are dominant, it is wilderness in its purest form. There are also glacial lakes hidden among the ridges, their waters an unreal shade of turquoise that only appears at such elevations. These lakes are often unnamed and unmapped, known only to locals or discovered by chance by explorers. They appear suddenly during hikes, sapphire mirrors reflecting jagged cliffs, encircled by meadows of flowering gentian and alpine poppies. In the rare moments when the sky clears, the still waters offer a stunning contrast to the brutal austerity of the peaks above. Despite its haunting beauty, Mount Jigushan is rarely visited by outsiders. The difficulty of access plays a large part. Roads are winding and treacherous, many are unpaved and seasonally closed due to landslides or snow. Trail networks, if they exist at all, are crude paths used by herders and pilgrims, not marked hiking routes. Trekking here demands self-sufficiency, mountaineering experience, and a deep respect for the unpredictability of alpine weather. Yet for those willing to brave it, the payoff is immense. Jigushan offers not just scenic vistas but a chance to step into a landscape untouched by commercialization, where every rock and tree still feels mythic and significant. For those fortunate enough to witness sunrise from a high perch on Jigushan, the experience is near transcendental. The entire valley below fills with a sea of clouds, and above it, the first light touches the knife edges of the summits in a pale crimson glow, gradually shifting to gold. The only sounds are wind and the flapping of a few lingering prayer flags. It's a moment of absolute stillness, so complete it feels as though the earth itself is holding its breath. In such a place, time doesn't pass, it hovers. Jigushan, in its isolation and grandeur, reminds us that China's spiritual mountains extend far beyond the boundaries of guidebooks and major temple sites. This peak stands as a testament to a wilder, older China, a place where nature has not been tamed and where the sacred is measured not by ornate halls but by cliffs, storms, and silence. Its ridges may never appear on travel posters, but those who reach them will carry their memory like a private scripture etched in stone and cloud. Mount Luohanshan, in Guizhou is one of those places where the natural world and ancient spirituality interlock so intimately that the air itself seems to carry the weight of centuries. Tucked deep in the interior of southwestern China, this enigmatic peak, cloaked in thick mist and etched by deep, yawning ravines, is not simply a mountain. It is a living tableau of China's karst wonderland, infused with the stillness of Buddhist reflection and the breath of primal earth. Luohan translates to Arhat, the enlightened disciples of the Buddha, and this name is no coincidence. Mount Luohan has long been considered a sacred site of Buddhist reverence, its striking terrain of limestone spires and secluded grottos echoing with the chants of monks and the rustle of leaves stirred by unseen winds. Unlike the showy grandeur of famous peaks like Amei or Wutai, Luohanshan exudes a quiet mysticism, tucked away from mass tourism and commercial fanfare. It is this obscurity that makes it all the more extraordinary. Geologically, Mount Luohan is part of the Wuling mountain system, which threads across Guizhou with dramatic flair. Its signature karst formations, formed over millions of years by the slow dissolution of soluble rock, create a surreal landscape. Here, stone pinnacles spike vertically from dense forests, twisted and sharpened by time, some appearing like petrified trees, others like ancient fortresses or leaning monks frozen in meditation. These limestone towers rise directly out of the greenery, their surfaces streaked with veins of iron and calcium, often slick with moss or shadowed by hanging vines. The ravines and gorges that slice through Luohanshan are some of the deepest in the province. Some are so narrow that daylight barely reaches the floor, and within them lies a world of constant twilight, fed by mountain springs, home to rare amphibians, and echoing with the trickle of water or the sudden screech of birds. Many of these valleys are only accessible by foot, via stone-cut stairways or moss-covered paths that cling precariously to cliffsides. The soundscape is quiet but never silent, chirping cicadas, rustling bamboo, distant monks' chants drifting through the canopy. At higher altitudes, dense clouds often envelop the mountain, muting color and sound, casting everything in a pearly haze. Trees here grow in fantastical forms, twisted by the wind, often draped in epiphytic mosses and orchids. In the right conditions, the mist gives way to sweeping panoramas that stretch across endless ranks of karst peaks like stone waves breaking upon the horizon. Sunlight, filtering through these clouds, creates an almost sacred illumination, as though revealing a realm between earth and sky. In such moments, the mountain seems to breathe. Interspersed among the rock formations are numerous Buddhist temples, shrines, and hermitages, many of them ancient and cloaked in lichen and weathered wood. These sites often rest on precarious cliffs or hidden caves, their placement not merely practical but symbolic, representing retreat from the world, a return to the elemental. One of the most revered sites is the Luohan Temple, nestled between two limestone pillars that resemble seated monks. This temple is not grand, but profoundly atmospheric. Smoke from incense curls into the mist, the distant toll of a bell echoes like a heartbeat, and carved reliefs of arhats line the corridors, their stone faces worn by centuries of prayer and rain. Legends swirl around Luohanshan. Some locals speak of the mountain as a place where enlightenment is possible within a single lifetime, provided one climbs its peaks in silence and leaves behind all worldly attachments. Other stories tell of reclusive monks who meditated in caves so deep they forgot the passage of time, emerging decades later untouched by age. While these tales may drift between faith and folklore, they express something deeper about the mountain's essence, a place untouched by urgency, suspended in its own rhythm, as timeless as the stone it rises from. Wildlife here remains remarkably intact, thanks in part to Guizhou's rugged remoteness. The forests are home to clouded leopards, golden pheasants, barking deer, and a variety of bat and insect species found nowhere else. Botanically, Luohanshan is a treasure trove, with rare orchids, medicinal herbs, and mosses used for centuries by local shamans and monks. These forests are not cultivated but revered, treated as sacred groves where every tree holds spiritual weight. Modern access to Mount Luohan is improving but still challenging. One must travel through remote villages and narrow, winding roads that cling to cliffsides. The journey itself becomes part of the experience. Passing through villages of Miao and Dong minorities, travelers are greeted by wooden stilt houses, drum towers, and rice terraces that undulate like green fabric over the hills. Local hospitality is warm, and traditions remain intact. Elders still recount tales of the Arhat mountain and the spirits said to guard its pathways. For hikers, the mountain offers trails that range from gentle walks to punishing ascents, some of which lead to dramatic overhangs, hidden waterfalls, or sky bridges linking one karst spine to another. These paths are lined with fluttering prayer flags, stone cairns, and the occasional lone monk sweeping fallen leaves from temple steps. In spring and autumn, Luohanshan transforms spectacularly. Spring brings a sudden bloom of wildflowers and mist, with the air saturated with the scent of pine and new blossoms. Autumn cloaks the mountain in gold and crimson, particularly in the maples and ginkgo groves near its base. Morning fog rises like steam from the ravines, and as the sun burns through, layers of landscape reveal themselves like unfolding scrolls, each more beautiful than the last. Yet perhaps the true magic of Mount Luohan lies not in its dramatic cliffs or mystical legends, but in its ability to create a sense of stillness. In a world rushing toward the future, Luohanshan stands as a silent invitation to pause, to breathe, to listen. It is a place where the boundaries between nature and spirit dissolve, where stone feels alive, and silence itself seems sacred. In that silence, broken only by the flutter of prayer flags or the soft call of a distant bird, one can almost hear the arhats themselves, those ancient guardians of wisdom, whispering through the mist, urging all who come to look inward, upward, and beyond. Mount Galagong, known locally as Gaoligongshan, is not just a mountain, it's an ecological empire, a wild corridor of staggering biodiversity, deep spiritual heritage, and rugged frontier mystique stretching across the western reaches of Yunnan province, skimming the border between China and Myanmar. Few places on Earth compress such extremes of climate, altitude, and culture into one uninterrupted mountain belt, and even fewer have remained so pristine, so untamed, and so vividly alive. Part of the Greater Hangduan Mountains and lying parallel to the Nujiang, Salween, River, the Galagong Range serves as a critical ecological divide between tropical Southeast Asia and the temperate highlands of the Tibetan Plateau. It is not just a single mountain, but rather a sinuous chain of peaks, valleys, and gorges, crowned with snowfields, cloaked in jungle, and riddled with waterfalls and steaming cloud forests. This vast stretch is part of the Gaoligongshan National Nature Reserve, a UNESCO-recognized World Biosphere Reserve and World Heritage Site, titles well deserved. Rising to heights of over 5,000 meters, yet descending into lowland jungle zones below 1,000 meters, Gaoligongshan traverses climates in vertical bands like pages in a living encyclopedia. Starting from bamboo groves and banana palms in the subtropical valleys, One ascends through broadleaf forests, pine and fir stands, then alpine meadows, and eventually into the permanent snow zones. This vertical stratification supports an astonishing range of life, earning the region a reputation as the gene bank of the world. The numbers are staggering. Gaoligongshan is home to over 4,000 species of vascular plants, more than 500 bird species, 150 species of mammals, and an extraordinary diversity of insects, amphibians, and fungi, many of which are endemic or newly discovered. Here live red pandas, black snub-nosed monkeys, clouded leopards, and elusive jungle cats. The forests are full of giant rhododendrons, magnolias, orchids, and ancient cycads. It's one of the last strongholds of truly intact montane rainforest in all of China, and likely one of the few places on Earth where tropical and subalpine species coexist in such proximity. The climate here is as varied as the landscape. The western slopes are drenched by monsoon rains from the Bay of Bengal, giving rise to lush, emerald-green valleys with moss-draped trees and thick canopies. By contrast, the eastern slopes, shielded by the high peaks, are drier, cooler, and dominated by spruce and hemlock forests, filled with birdsong and fresh, pine-scented air. Mist often hangs low in the valleys, veiling the landscape in an otherworldly softness, pierced by shafts of sun and echoing with the trill of exotic birds. Yet Gaoligongshan is not merely a wilderness. This region has long been inhabited by a mosaic of ethnic minorities, including the Lisu, Durung, Nu, Palang, Tibetan, and Bai peoples. Scattered across the slopes are their wooden stilt villages, often tucked away beside streams or built into forest clearings. These communities maintain distinct languages, clothing, agricultural practices, and animistic traditions, some of which have barely changed over centuries. Locals grow rice, corn, buckwheat, and medicinal herbs in terraced fields, and maintain sacred groves where ancient trees are worshipped as spirits. Spirituality and ecology are deeply intertwined in Galigong. Many trails are lined with stone cairns, prayer flags, and weathered totems, indicating a worldview where mountains are deities, rivers are sentient, and every living thing possesses a soul. Some communities still hold sky burial rituals, others perform ancestor dances in bone masks, and a few maintain oral traditions that describe the mountains as living dragons, a belief reinforced by the serpentine spine of the range itself. For trekkers and travelers, Galigong offers a sublime mix of isolation and immersion. Multi-day treks snake through dense jungle, bamboo tunnels, and moss-carpeted paths. Along the way, explorers may encounter abandoned Qing-era forts, war memorials from the World War II Burma campaign, or remote hot springs steaming in the cold air of upper valleys. Some trails follow the ancient tea horse road, once used by mule caravans carrying pu'er tea from Yunnan to Tibet. Today, these routes pass through ruins, remote monasteries, and thick bamboo glades where you can go an entire day without seeing another soul. One of the most revered areas in the range is Tungchong, a volcanic basin on the eastern flank of Gaoligongshan. The region is dotted with geothermal vents, hot springs, and sulfur pools, giving the forest a prime-val atmosphere. Tungchong was historically a trading center and military post, its stone streets and covered bridges echoing a long, complex past. Here, travelers can stay in traditional wooden inns, eat wild mushroom stew by firelight, and hike to hidden waterfalls cascading through fern-choked ravines. But perhaps the most transformative experience in Gaoligongshan is simply to stop, to listen to the hum of life around you. In the silence of its rain-soaked forests, you may hear the rustle of a monkey in the canopy, the soft drip of dew from bromeliads, or the echo of a hornbill across a canyon. At dawn, the first sunlight ignites the snowy crowns of the peaks in a pale gold that slowly trickles down the ridgelines like liquid light. At night, the stars explode overhead in cold brilliance, untouched by city glow, framed by jagged silhouettes and the far-off whoop of nocturnal animals. In the context of climate change and habitat loss, Gaoligongshan remains a last sanctuary, both ecologically and culturally. It is a refuge not just for species, but for ideas, for traditions, for the slow, harmonious rhythms that once guided human life. Unlike more famous national parks, Galigong is not about spectacle but depth. It's not the postcard image of a mountain, but a vast, living body that must be walked, breathed, and respected. Its value lies in its wholeness, in its ability to remain what so much of the world has lost. Gaoligongshan is not easy to get to, and perhaps that's a blessing. It doesn't seek admiration, It commands reverence. It is not for casual tourists but for pilgrims of wilderness, seekers of the sacred, and those willing to lose themselves to find something real. In every mossy step, every breath of mist, every call of unseen creatures, Galagong whispers a truth that echoes louder than any monument, that the earth, left to itself, is not only beautiful, it is alive in ways we are only just beginning to remember. Mount Hailuogu, nestled on the eastern face of Mount Gongar, also known as Minya Konka, the king of Sichuan mountains, is a place where ancient ice meets subtropical forest, and glacier tongues spill downward from snow-choked heights into mossy, mist-filled valleys. This spectacular terrain, part of the Eastern Minute Mountains in western Sichuan province, contains one of China's most accessible glacial environments. The Hailuogu icefield, a surreal convergence of raw alpine power and deep ecological richness. Hailuogu lies within the Hailuogu Glacier Forest Park, at the edge of the vast Gongar mountain range, whose towering central summit rises to 7,556 meters, taller than any other mountain east of the Himalayas. Though Mount Gongar itself is cloaked in myth, clouds, and deadly weather, its eastern slopes descend sharply into lower valleys laced with ancient woods and silvery rivers, offering a rare chance to experience high-altitude glaciation without a harrowing expedition. The Hailuogu Glacier, China's lowest elevation modern glacier, reaches as far down as 2,850 meters above sea level, making it almost unbelievably accessible for visitors, climbers, and scientists alike. As you approach from the town of Morshi, winding through dense coniferous forests and narrow gorges, the landscape begins to shift with startling drama. Snowy ridgelines flash above treetops, glacial meltwater rushes through stony riverbeds, and sudden icefalls glimmer blue and silver through breaks in the canopy. The deeper you go, the more the air chills, and soon you find yourself walking among prehistoric boulders, silvery birch woods, and thick carpets of alpine rhododendrons, all beneath the looming crown of Gongar's eastern wall. The glacier itself is a colossal river of compressed blue ice, cracked and creaking with movement, perpetually reshaped by gravity, sun, and snowfall. Massive seracs, jagged towers of fractured ice, dot the glacier's surface, rising like frozen ruins of a shattered city. The number 1 glacier, the largest of several tongues in the Hailuogu system, cascades down from a 6,750-meter high cirque in an astonishing icefall over 1,100 meters tall, the largest known icefall in China. The noise of the ice cracking, shifting, and groaning is ever present, echoing like thunder through the mountain amphitheater. This remarkable setting has long drawn more than just mountaineers and scientists. For centuries, Tibetan pilgrims and monks have journeyed to this region, believing the massive presence of Gongar and its icy offspring to be manifestations of mountain deities. Prayer flags flutter in the wind, strung across trails and staked on ridge crests, colorful whispers against the stark white of ice and snow. Even today, local legends warn of spirits residing in the glacier, guarding it from the unworthy or disrespectful, and villagers often perform rituals before venturing too far into its domain. Despite the ruggedness of the surroundings, infrastructure here is surprisingly well developed, yet tastefully restrained, allowing immersion without intrusion. Visitors can travel by cable car or footpath to glacier observation decks, perched at safe points above the main icefield. On clear days, these platforms offer breathtaking views of Mount Gongar, its silver slopes streaked with avalanche chutes, and the entire tongue of the glacier snaking down into the forest below. It's a rare union of alpine grandeur and subtropical lushness, with bamboo groves, pine trees, and glacier all visible in a single sweeping gaze. Below the icy heights, the valleys of Hailuogu are warm, wet, and full of life. Thanks to the steep topography and monsoon-fed precipitation, the park encompasses multiple climate zones, each stacked vertically like the layers of a natural museum. Mosses drip from ancient firs, orchids bloom on the forest floor, and rare birds, including blood pheasants, white-eared pheasants, and golden eagles, circle the canopy and cliffs. Black bears, macaques, and even elusive snow leopards have been recorded in the higher reaches, moving silently along the rock-strewn ridges where few humans tread. Yet Hailuogu is more than a marvel of geology and biodiversity. It is also a place of healing and introspection, home to steaming hot springs that bubble from cracks in the earth, warmed by geothermal veins that pulse beneath the glacial surface. Thermal pools tucked beneath towering pines offer visitors a chance to soak in warm mineral-rich water while staring up at the drifting icefields, an experience that is equal parts surreal and deeply restorative. Nearby, The town of Morshi adds a layer of cultural charm to the experience. This small settlement, historically a missionary outpost and Tibetan trading point, features stone-paved streets, carved wooden homes, and remnants of Western-style churches built in the early 20th century, now harmoniously coexisting with traditional Tibetan prayer halls and pagodas. The scent of yak butter candles and roasted barley fills the narrow alleys, and from the rooftops, the icy peaks of Gongar loom like silent watchers. Treks branching off from Hailuogu lead deeper into Mount Gongar's lesser-seen faces, offering multi-day journeys through glacial lakes, moraines, yaks grazing in alpine meadows, and small Buddhist monasteries tucked into hidden valleys. These are paths less traveled, where prayer wheels spin in the wind, and every turn brings a new vista of crags, cloud, and ice. For all its accessibility, Hailuogu retains the feeling of entering a forgotten world. There is something primordial in its composition, the ancient breath of a glacier exhaling into a living forest, the boom of ice shearing off cliffs, the hush of snowfall on wooden prayer platforms. It is not merely a place to see, but to feel, to stand still, listen, and allow the vast presence of the mountain to speak in its slow, icy language. In a world growing ever louder and more fragmented, Hailuogu is a reminder of wholeness, of mountains that remember a colder age, of trees that have watched glacier form, retreat, and return, of people who still walk with reverence beneath stone and sky. Here, in the shadow of Gongar and the shimmer of ice, one is reminded that some places are not meant to be conquered, but simply witnessed, with humility and awe. This video is for educational or entertainment purposes only, and information provided in the video may be incorrect. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel and like the video.